Yo, what's good, my great sages? It's your host, Sage D Samurai here, now here today to bring y'all a new What If, this being the What If movie to What If Asta had Sasuke's abilities. Thank y'all so much for tuning into this What If, and thank you to the person who recommended me this What If idea. I hope you, along with everyone else, enjoys. As now with that being said, let's get started.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do?
Alright, so to begin the What If, we're now going to begin with Asta's origins. Dating way back, all the way up to the very beginning of the series, we will see Asta as he'll be introduced living in Hajj village and being raised there with his brother Yuno, as well as the rest of the kids at the orphanage. Now Asta, during his earlier years of his life, he would behave very similar to his canon himself, all the way until the events with Yuno's pendant. As turning to said events, we will see Asta as he will be currently getting beaten down by the man who was overall just getting increasingly annoyed with Asta's relentless attempts at getting back Yuno's pendant. But after eventually landing Asta with the hit so hard that he couldn't get up, Asta will be seen laying on the ground as Yuno would rush over trying to check on him, all the while the drunken man would try walking away with Yuno's pendant. But you'll see as he was walking away, this is when suddenly turning our attention to Asta, this is where we will then see his eyes then widen. As in, 1 second he's on the ground and the very next second we will see him then getting up, acting as if nothing happened. And the man, of course, hearing Asta getting up and everything, will then stop in his tracks as he turns to Asta as he then glares at him. As this is when suddenly he would then see Asta approaching him, causing him to get angry as he would then try to take a swing at Asta, telling him to stay down, only to then be surprised. As right in front of the man's as well as Yuno's eyes, this is where they will then see Asta as he ends up moving with a speed that he didn't show previously before, as he ends up dodging out of the way of the man's attack before suddenly slamming him with a punch so hard in his stomach that the man was literally knocked out unconscious. Now, all the while Asta had done this, the man could swear for a very brief second that he actually got a good look at Asta's eyes, and when he did, he swore that Asta's eyes had changed from the regular green color to that of red, with a black tomoe with it. As eventually, after seeing that the man was completely knocked out, this is where we would then see Asta retrieve back Yuno's pendant before going to him, with Yuno looking at Asta with concern, concerning the fact that he has no idea exactly what was going on, as he ends up trying to get a good look at Asta, but the thing is, his hair was currently getting in the way, with the shade of his hair covering Asta's eyes. But eventually, after Asta ends up arriving right in front of Yuno, we would then see Asta then look him directly in the eyes, as we see that Asta's eyes had returned back to the regular green color. As he ends up smiling before giving back Yuno his pendant, as Yuno ends up smiling thanking Asta, as the rest of the events that happened there would proceed the exact same way as it did in the main timeline. Although unbeknownst to Yuno was the fact that Asta had a very firm recollection, more precisely about what happened on his side, and more precisely about what happened when he had first awakened the Sharingan. As we now end up turning to the next few years that go by. As turning to these next set of years, we will see Asta as he'll begin to undergo quite a drastic change. I mean, it doesn't happen immediately, but eventually after looking back on everything, everyone can see that Asta has most definitely developed the most ever since his earlier years. As we see Asta change from being very loud and extroverted to being much more calm and composed while also thinking things through before he acts. We also see him lose his crush on Sister Lily, mostly because of the fact that Asta realized just how weird it was, and honestly, half the time we will see him apologizing to Sister Lily because of the fact that he realized now how uncomfortable it was, with Sister Lily telling Asta that it was alright and that she was happy to see that he was developing quite well. As also during these years, as we see Asta continue doing his regular routine of helping out everyone, we would also see him do a training regimen that he had created. As this training regimen actually included some type of fighting style within it, as he had picked up on some books of martial arts that he found at the library, which yes, Asta actually goes there in this timeline, mostly because of the fact that he's focusing much more on improving himself in order to make up for the fact that he doesn't have magic. But all that would then change eventually as we then arrive for the grimoire ceremony, as during that time we will see most of the events play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline. As we see Asta there watching Yuno getting his 4-leaf grimoire, with Yuno getting praised for it completely. Although Asta would be there praising his brother as Yuno would declare that he would become the Wizard King, with Asta in his mind just calmly stating that yeah, that's not going to happen. But while this was going on, this is where a change would then happen compared to how it went in the main timeline. As while Asta was there complimenting Yuno and everything, this is where Asta would then think that he wasn't going to get a grimoire, which was alright with him considering the fact that, he was not going to give up that easily when it came to his dream. But just as Asta was thinking this is when an energy like no other then begins to burst throughout the grimoire ceremony, as it begins to spread all around with everyone actually holding in their breath except for Asta, as instead Asta ends up turning his head directly to the source of this energy, as he seems drawn to it just as it was drawn to him. As this is where everyone would then look on to see a grimoire like no other then begin to fall, as this grimoire was completely black, but you could see like metal plates across from it. And not only that, but if you look at the very center of it, you could see a 5-leaf clover. As everyone will be looking on, wondering just what is this, as one thing was very clear just from this burst of energy. It was not magic whatsoever. It was something else. Something sinister, even. As Asta would be there watching this is when eventually the grimoire would be right in front of him as Asta ends up grabbing it. And when he does, this is when Asta wouldn't feel it. As at first he thought that he never had it. And eventually, after, trying so long to, try to see if maybe he could awaken it some way, eventually he just gave up in the idea entirely that he would even have a drop of it. But now here it was. As soon as Asta had made contact with that grimoire, it would have awakened. His magic that had laid dormant for now years, as it will begin to release in spades. We will see a generous burst of Asta magic as it begins to flood just the entirety of not only the grimoire ceremony, but the entirety of Hodge Village, as it ends up sweeping through the land with everyone tensing up, as Asta will be just reeling in on the magical energy that he was having. As being the closest of everyone there, would look at Asta in complete shock, as he'll be paying more attention to Asta's eyes. As in that very moment, would see that Asta's eyes had changed from the regular green color to that of red, as Asta's eyes had awakened to that of the Sharingan, as we see the one Tomoe fully appear. But not only that, but we also see a second Tomoe growing out, as it hadn't been completely formed yet, but we could see signs of it growing. As Asta would just be there reeling in all the magic energy that he had just accumulated before eventually he would then finally get it all under control. As the magic would all return back to him, as everyone could do nothing more but look at Asta in complete amazement, as even though he had like reined it all in and everything, they could still feel it. It was as if his aura was all over the place, as it made everyone feel as if they were walking on glass. As Asta, after reeling in his magical energy, would then grab his grimoire, as after grabbing it, this is when Asta would then smirk, as he would then look directly in the eyes, as he would still have the Sharingan eyes activated. This is when he would then firmly declare that he will be the Wizard King, as everyone can do nothing more but look on in pure silence, as we will now transition to the next scene. So now, moving past the events that happened at the grimoire ceremony, we will see Asta and Yuno currently exiting out of the area, as they'll be going back to the orphanage ready to celebrate. But as they were doing this, we will see them having a little bit of small talk, with Yuno asking Asta how does it feel to have magic, with Asta saying that it was quite weird considering the fact that he spent the entirety of his life without magic. So now having it, he felt both happy but also a little bit weird, since it was an odd feeling to him. Now, while they were walking, this is where Yuno would then ask Asta about why exactly his eyes changed color, with Asta saying that he has no idea, as he could sense when he activates the Sharingan, as he feels the magic just be drawn into his eyes. But Asta eventually was able to stop the flow of it, causing his eyes to return back to normal. As Asta would flick the Sharingan on and off before eventually they would then arrive in front of the nobles, similar to how they do in the main timeline, as they were beginning to threaten Yuno and also Asta, saying that they put up quite a performance even though they were commoners, and seeing as they were nobles, they felt as if they had been disrespected and embarrassed. Now, hearing this would just take care of them just like he does in the main timeline, but eventually after things finally begin to settle down, this is when they would then encounter Repchi, who ends up capturing both Asta and Yuno, with him trying to take Yuno's grimoire, saying that it would sell for a high price. Now, Yuno, seeing this, would begin to get angry, but unfortunately he was helpless in this scenario, with Repchi explaining that he used to be a magic knight, saying that Yuno and Asta stood no chance whatsoever. As after explaining this to Yuno, this is where Repchi would then try taking off with Yuno's grimoire, with Yuno cursing as he struggles to get free of the chains, all the while Asta would be there silently watching all of this, as he himself will be restrained by chains as well. As Asta, seeing Yuno of course acting this way, as after all Yuno is his rival, and after seeing how Repchi was just arrogantly ignoring him, this would cause Asta's emotions to heighten, as we see his mana beginning to rush entirely, as Asta begins to grow pissed off, As this is when he then firmly declares that he won't let this happen, as we see Asta's eyes then change from the regular green color to that of the Sharingan once again. But this time, we will see that instead of the normal 1 Tomoe Sharingan, his thing would evolve into that of the 2 Tomoe. Now, when it evolves into the 2 Tomoe, we will then see his mana begin to release in spades, as this will cause Revchi to then stop walking as he turns to Asta, telling him that it was pointless since those chains restrict to magic, but then he would then be surprised, as Asta was releasing more and more magic, with the more magic that Asta was releasing being so powerful enough to the point that Revchi can see that his chains were actually breaking, as he ends up taking a step back saying that that was impossible as these chains were supposed to be unbreakable, but it seemed as if Asta had other plans. As Asta would end up firmly declaring that as the next future Wizard King, he wouldn't lose to anyone or anything out there, and that was a promise that he swears on. As after making that promise, this is where Asta would then release his magic entirely, as we would then see Revchi's chains that were holding Asta then be completely obliterated, as Revchi is then blown back by the force along with Yuno. As both of them would end up being there just looking at Asta in complete shock, all the while Asta would be there silently with now his eyes being covered by the shade of his hair, as the grimoire would be there floating right beside him. Now Revchi seeing Asta there would at first panic before eventually calming down, as he realized that he had more experience than Asta when it came to magic. So that meant that he should be able to beat him, right? As he would summon out more chains, telling Asta that he would regret what he was doing, but Asta says nothing else, as Revchi would then throw an attack towards Asta, hoping to finish him off, as Asta then takes in a very deep breath. As right as the chain grew closer and closer, this is when Asta would then suddenly open his mouth to then release a ginormous fireball, one that ends up overtaking the entirety of the area that Revchi was in, as Revchi can do nothing more but scream out in absolute shock and also in horror, as his chains will be burned to a crisp as he ends up getting hit with a ginormous fireball. All the while Yuno in the background would be watching all this in complete shock, as he'll be seeing Asta as he just completely decimates the area where Revchi was in, as by the time the attack had finally died down, we will see Revchi now defeated while also being heavily burnt and also just heavily damaged in general, as well as we also see that the entirety of the area where Revchi was also heavily damaged by Asta's attack. As now seeing his enemy defeated, this is when Asta would then retrieve back Yuno's grimoire before eventually giving it back to him. With Yuno seeing this and actually recalling that this actually played out very similar to how it did multiple years ago when it came to his pendant, as he ends up smiling thanking Asta for the grimoire, as after that we would then see the rest of the events play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, where both of them end up declaring the challenge about who's going to become the Wizard King first, with both of them declaring that it was going to be them. As now with these events coming to an end, this is where we will now turn to the next couple of months that go by, as we see both Asta and Yuno now training for the Magic Knight entry exams. With Asta during the entirety of the month just completely focused on training with his magic and his Sharingan, as he'll be trying his best to do everything he can and learn just how much he's able to do with them, considering the fact that he's never had these abilities before, so he was currently right now just testing the limits. As eventually, after the following months would come to an end, we will see both Asta and Yuno as they will finally arrive to take the Magic Knight entry exams. As after briefly signing themselves up, this is where we will then see both Asta and Yuno then enter inside the testing area, as once they arrive, this is when the exams will then begin. As for the events that actually end up happening here, I'm going to very much skim forward it, mostly because of the fact that not much really changes here other than the fact that Asta does way better. As thanks to his newly acquired magic, Asta is able to perform all the exercises that were presented during the test extremely well, and enough to the point where even the captains were very much impressed with him. As we would see Asta passing every single portion of the exam before eventually he would then get to the 1v1 matches, to which even this part is going to be skimmed forward, mostly because of the fact that nothing really changes from the main timeline in this moment, as Asta still ends up one-shotting his opponent. As right after that, we will then see the team selections, as we end up seeing many people then get rejected, with some people joining the Magic Knights. As when it came to Yuno's turn, Yuno got all hands, to which meant that he was going to go with the Golden Dawn. And as for Asta, he actually ended up with only 3 hands in this timeline, which was actually really good considering the fact that the most that anyone has gotten other than Yuno was actually 2, so seeing Asta get 3 was very much impressive. As after looking around, as Asta would see, the teams that wanted him, this is when he would then point to the Black Bulls saying that he wants to join them, surprising the other 2 captains that had their arms raised, but still nonetheless, Asta's choice was very much, already made. As now with the exams completed, and after Asta says farewell to Yuno, we will then see Asta as he ends up going to the Black Bull's base. As once he ends up arriving there, Yami would end up making his entrance and everything, gathering the entirety of the team's attention before turning their attention onto Asta, who ends up giving his introduction. As after that introduction, we will then see Asta then go through a couple events that play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, but at the end of the day, the outcome remains the same, as Asta would end up joining the Black Bulls, as he would be able to complete Magma's baptism relatively easily by using his flame magic to deflect everything. As this would impress everyone inside the group, as they end up complimenting Asta, as eventually they'll then give him his Black Bull's robe, making Asta an official Black Bull member. As now with the events taken care of, this is where we're now going to do a time skip. So now flashing forward to the next couple of weeks that go by, we will see Asta as he begins to get used to living with the Black Bulls, as during this time we will see many events play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, such as Asta being introduced to Noelle, and eventually after saving Noelle getting a crush on Asta, and overall just basically everything that happened in the main timeline playing out here just in a slightly different manner. Until eventually it was finally time for Asta to go on his very first mission, as he would be accompanying Magma as well as Noelle, as they'll be taken to Magma's village in order to take care of a couple of boars, since both Magma as well as Yami had lost on a bet. As now with this explained, this is where we will now turn to when the team ends up arriving at Magma's village. As when they end up arriving, we will see Asta immediately get to work, as he ends up taking care of boars left and right, with Magma helping out only a little bit, considering the fact that he was pretty tired with, being the one to take Noelle to the village, and that meant that he has to exert even more magic to do so. So after taking care of a couple of boars, we will see Magma rest, all the while Asta will continue doing the job before eventually finishing it much earlier than he did in the main timeline. As Magma would end up telling Asta that, that was pretty manly of him, with Noelle asking Asta exactly how he was able to gain so much control over his magic, with Asta giving her a couple of tips here and there. This is when eventually they would be able to get back to Magma's village way earlier than they did in the main timeline, giving the village chief all the boars that they had defeated, to which he ends up thanking them until suddenly this is when Heath and his men would then arrive at the village, as he ends up demanding for the magic stone. We will see similar events play out here with, Heath demanding for everything and the village chief trying to negotiate with him and trying to reason to him that they don't have it, before eventually Heath then decides to attack the village chief, as he wants to get the magic stone and nothing was going to stop him. However, right before the attacks could land, this is when suddenly Magma would then intervene, shooting out a fireball to intercept the attack and destroy it, as this is when he then firmly declares that he's not going to let anything happen to this village, with Heath after hearing this then sighing as he takes out his pocket watch and seeing that they were beginning to get behind on schedule. This is when he ends up declaring that he was not going to take it easy on them, and in fact if they were not going to give him the magic stone willingly, then he was going to take it by force. As this is when both Heath and as well as his comrades would then begin to gather up magic, all the while Asta would then stand right beside Magma as the two of them then prepare to fight, as the fight between these two groups would then begin. We will see this fight get broken up into two parts, with Asta facing off against the other comrades of Heath, all the while Magma will be facing off against Heath himself. As during this time, we will see Asta as he ends revealing just how strong he had gotten, as he'll be taking on 4 different mages at the same time, as each one of them will be trying their best to hit Asta, all the while he'll be dodging all this. As you see, by the time that the fight had begun, Asta's eyes had changed to the Sharingan eyes, as you'll see him easily avoiding all the attacks, as he's able to see where exactly they're going to be coming from, and he's able to react to them. As Asta is able to avoid all the attacks, lining them with blows, and using his fire magic, as he will end up creating fire arrows to, kind of stun them and, knock them out, as well as even creating a fireball to just completely just destroy any spells that were sent his way, as Asta was making quick work of them. But by the time that Asta was finally finished with all the grunts, this is when he would then turn his attention onto Magma, only to see that Magma was actually losing the Heath, as unfortunately Magma did not have the experience nor the magical power in order to actually contend with Heath. As unfortunately Magma do remind you, he was exhausted after taking Noelle to the village, and not only that, but he also helped out Asta a little bit when it came to the boars. So Magma was pretty much very much weakened during this point, but yeah, he was still able to put up a pretty good fight. As now turning our attention to Heath, we will see him then try to finish off Magma as he was on the ground, as he ends up summoning out an ice shard, with Asta seeing this trying to put a stop to it, as he ends up shooting out a ginormous fireball directly in the direction of Heath, telling him to stop. Now Heath, seeing the ginormous fireball, you would think that he would panic, but instead Heath just calmly look at the fireball before suddenly turning the ice shard's attention onto the fireball. Now Asta seeing this would then be puzzled, considering the fact that everyone knows that ice would lose to fire, but this is when, to his surprise, Heath would then begin to add large amounts of magic to the ice shard, making it way larger and wider, while at the same time also making it sharper. As after reinforcing the ice shard, this is when Heath would then launch the ice shard directly into the fireball, and to Asta's surprise, the ice shard would actually pierce through his fireball and stab him directly into the side of his stomach. As Asta, feeling pain from the injury and just being left in shock, he would end up collapsing down to his knees as he struggles to breathe, with Heath just looking at him with an impassive gaze. As this is when Heath would then explain to Asta that while yes, his power was great, unfortunately that power meant nothing without no technique. As he ends up explaining that Asta needs much more refinement in his technique, and hopefully he will learn that in the next life. As after that, this is when Heath will then turn his attention onto Noel and the rest of the villagers, as he would then summon out a ginormous array of ice shards, ready to finish them off. As Asta would be there looking at the scene, breathing heavily as he tries his best to, take care of the ice shard, which was still there, as even though Asta was adding, fire magic, it was not like melting at all, as he couldn't believe this situation. But just as things were about to take a turn for the worse, this is when we would then turn our attention to Asta's mind, as by this point now, Asta really thinks that this might be the end for him, as he begins to look back on all his memories, as he literally begins to see his entire life flash before his eyes. But however, at that moment, as Asta will be looking through all his memories, this is when suddenly he would then be stopped at one particular memory, the memory where both him and Yuno would then declare that they were going to try to become the Wizard King. As Asta, after looking back on this memory, would then suddenly grit his teeth, as this is when suddenly his eyes would then glow red once again, as turning back to, what's actually going on in like the physical realm and everything. As we exit out Asta's mind, this is where we will then see Asta as he then erupts with flames all over him. Now this will cause Heath's attention to turn back to Asta, as the ice shard that was inside Asta's stomach would then actually end up melting away, with the wound that was there actually being closed up by Asta's flames, as Asta ends up firmly declaring that he wouldn't lose to anyone. Now Heath will look at Asta in complete shock before looking at his eyes, as he would actually have to take a step back, as Asta's eyes by this point now would actually be revealed to jump from the 2 Tomoe to now the 3 Tomoe, as Asta would firmly end up declaring to Heath that he will defeat him here and now, with Heath after hearing this then summoning out a bunch of ice shards, telling Asta that this will be the end for him, as he ends up shooting out every last one of these ice shards that were just as powerful as the one previously before, the one that stabbed Asta earlier. But yet, even after seeing these ginormous amount of ice shards coming towards him, Asta remained calm, as instead he then sucked up a ginormous amount of air before staring directly at the ice shards before suddenly opening his mouth and releasing it, the Dragon Flame Bomb. As we see the fireball from earlier, but now it was in the shape of a dragon, and not only just one, but also 3 of them appear. As to Heath's surprise, his ice would actually be melted, as literally the ice spears were not able to actually pierce through the dragon whatsoever, as he would then be hit and bombarded by a ginormous burst of flaming dragons, as every last one of them would hit Heath and before eventually exploding, causing him massive damage and shaking up the entirety of the village, as everyone there would just be watching on in complete shock. As by the time that the explosion calmed down and everything, they would then see Heath, who was now completely defeated, as he'd be burnt very badly, and overall he was not going to get up anymore after that attack. All the while also would be there sitting victorious, as this is where we would then see his eyes return back to normal as he ends up collapsing down to the ground, falling unconscious. As this is where we're now going to do a time skip. So now flashing forward to the end of these events, we end up seeing Asta, as him, Magma, as well as Noel would all be there interrogating Heath and his men. But unfortunately, just like in the main timeline, Heath and his men would end up doing the same thing that they do in the main timeline and just, finishing themselves off in order not to reveal any information. Now this will cause all of them to be quite horrified about what happened, but still nonetheless the arc will continue on, with the one good thing coming from it being the fact that the village chief in this timeline was still alive. However, after leaving the scene, Asta then realized that he still had a long way to go, as after all, during this fight he had been very close to death, and that was actually the very first time that Asta really fought someone with a lot of experience, to which Revchi did not count whatsoever, considering the fact that, well, he was beaten by main timeline Asta, who had never swung a sword before in his entire life. So yeah, I'm pretty sure this Asta could easily beat Revchi, but Heath was just an entire person entirely. So with those thoughts in mind, Asta would resolve to train himself and grow even stronger, as with those thoughts in mind, this is where we will now move towards the very next arc, this being the dungeon exploration arc, as we will now turn to it. So now kicking off the arc, we will see it begin very similar to that of the main timeline, as this is where we will then see a dungeon then emerge, with this being reported to Julius, who ends up sending this mission and actually specifically asking for Asta to be a part of the mission. Now, when Asta ended up, hearing about this, since the entirety of his time he's been spending just training and, refining all his techniques, he would actually accept the mission along with Noel, as this is when they would also end up getting teamed up with Luck just like they do in the main timeline, before eventually they'll then finally go to the dungeon. Now I'm going to skim forward most of the portions that happen when it's just like the three of them, considering the fact that nothing really changes, as Luck was really trying to see exactly all the things that Asta was capable of doing, with Asta destroying every single trap that came their way with proficient ease. But eventually, after doing this for a while, Luck would then separate from the group because he heard a fight, so that left both Asta as well as Noelle by themselves. And when Noelle ends up falling for another trap, Asta would try to save her, only to then be intercepted by Yuno, as the Golden Dawn team would end up making their arrival. Now, the reunion between both Asta and Yuno would go very similar to the main timeline, but the thing is, it's much more, heartwarming, and not only that, but it's not exactly as over-exaggerated as it was in the main timeline, since both of them were pretty chill, as both of them just simply end up fist bumping each other, saying that it was good to see the other one. Now, both of them would begin catching up, asking about how they've been, ever since joining their Magic Knight squad, but both of them recalling tales, before eventually Klaus would then intervene, after hearing that Asta and his team were assigned to this mission, saying that it was impossible because they were the Black Bulls and the lowest of the low. But yeah, even after hearing this, Asta showed no care whatsoever, and instead he actually challenged Yuno to see who was going to make it to the treasure room first, with Yuno accepting this as both teams would go their separate way, with Klaus being extremely upset about the fact that Asta was ignoring him and telling Yuno that he shouldn't be talking to that commoner, with Yuno explaining that Asta was his brother, to which Klaus would be surprised, but even more disgusted about Yuno as well as Asta. Now after this, we will see very similar events play out, as both Asta and as well as Noelle, would end up eventually finding Luck, who is currently right now on the ground defeated, as Luck will be trying his best to get up as he tries to hunt down the man that defeated him, only for Asta as well as Noelle to talk him out of it, as Luck, realizing exactly how dumb he was being, would then apologize for his actions, as soon after a little bit of scolding from Noelle, this is when they would then rush towards the treasure room, only to see the shocking scene. As unfortunately, just like in the main timeline, Yuno would be on his last legs, as he would be facing off against Mars and actually losing. But right before the generous mineral blade could actually slice Yuno, as Yuno would try to, counterattack it, this is when suddenly Asta would then appear right in front of Yuno, as this is when suddenly a generous wall of flames would then appear as Asta ends up blocking the attack. With Asta's power actually surprising everyone, with Asta asking Yuno exactly how many times does he need to save him, with Yuno of course getting quite annoyed about it, but still nonetheless thanking Asta for the help, as soon after that this is when he decides to actually relax for a little bit, telling Asta that he's gonna let him take care of the fight, but not because he needed Asta's help, but it's because of the fact that he was just too annoyed to really deal with Mars himself. Now Asta hearing this would roll his eyes at his brother's response, but nonetheless this is when Asta would then firmly declare to Mars that he was going to kick his ass, with Mars hearing this then telling Asta that this was going to be his grave, as this is where the fight between both Asta and Mars would then begin. Now similar to the main timeline, Mars ends up summoning out a bunch of mineral clones in order to go after the injured Magic Knights, to which Luck and Noelle would have no choice but to try their best to block them and basically stop them from attacking the injured comrades. Now Klaus would be seeing this, wondering exactly why they were doing this and exactly how they were doing this, considering the fact that the Black Bulls were the lowest of the low, so they shouldn't be this powerful. But meanwhile, while all this was happening, we will now turn our attention to Asta, who is facing off against Mars, as both of them will be exchanging blows, as Mars will be using his mineral magic trying to stab it into Asta, with Asta already showing off just how much he improved since the last mission, as his fire magic already shown to be much more refined, as he really took Heat's words to heart, as he ends up showing off exactly how much he improved, with his fire magic easily burning away the minerals and not even letting one of them even have a scratch at his uniform, as Asta was really showing exactly how strong he had grown. But even with this display of power, Mars would then quickly tell Asta that it wouldn't be enough, as this when suddenly he would then summon out a generous amount of mineral blades, each one of these being very small but also very fast, as they would then rush at Asta from all angles, with Asta seeing this quickly coming up with a plan, as this is when he would then activate his Sharingan, as this is when he then jumps up into the air before spinning rapidly, as he would then release small bursts of fireballs from his mouth, with Asta calling this a Phoenix Sage fire, as this fire was like a small little railgun of flames, as every single one of them would spread out all around, hitting the mineral blades and destroying them, as Asta would once again be revealed to come out unscathed. Now Mars would compliment Asta for his skills, but this is when he then tells Asta that this is the end, as right as Asta had been finally finished dealing with all the mineral blades, this is when suddenly he would then be hit from the side by a generous hand of minerals, as literally it was a generous mineral hand that was extremely sharp, as some of it was stabbed into Asta's skin, causing Asta to grit his teeth. But this is when another one would then slam into Asta, as by this point now he'll be actually hit from all sides, causing him to then scream out in pain, with everyone else looking on in pure horror, considering the fact that they thought that Asta had actually had it in the bag. As by the time that Mars would finally end up releasing Asta, we would then be revealed to see that Mars had entered into some type of mineral armor, as this is when he then tells Asta that this was always inevitable, with Asta now being revealed actually being quite bloodied and very badly injured, as things all of a sudden just simply took a turn for the worse, with it being so bad that both Luck as well as Noel thought about jumping in as they prepared to do so, only to then be surprised, as everyone around them would then look at Asta in complete shock, as even though he was injured, he would then look at Mars directly in the eyes before smirking, as in the very next second, this is when suddenly we will then see Asta's body then erupt in flames, as he would then spiral out before suddenly dispersing all around, as it would then be revealed that the Asta from earlier before was nothing more but a fire clone. As everyone looking at this would be so surprised, as in the very next instance, this is when Mars would then hear Asta's voice from behind him, as he then turns around only to then get hit by not one, not two, heck not even three, but 5 dragon flame bombs, as each one of them would hit both Mars and his mineral armor, causing a ginormous explosion so powerful that it rocked the entirety of the area that they were in, as it would then be revealed that Asta would be there standing calm and composed and not a single scratch on him, as this is where we will then do a little bit of a repeat about what just happened. As you see, during the time that Asta was bombarded by all angles from mineral blades, and after he counterattacked them, a ginormous amount of smoke actually picked up around the area that Asta was in. As using the smoke to his advantage, Asta quickly came up with a plan, as he ends up substituting himself with a flaming clone, so that way he can get behind Mars and charge up his most powerful attack, the Dragon Flame Bomb. And it seemed to have done the trick, as we're now turning back to the present, we will see Mars, as by this point now the mineral armor was completely destroyed, and not only that, but Mars actually laid there on the ground defeated and heavily burnt by Asta, as Asta had revealed exactly how strong and how much he had grown in such a short amount of time, with Yuno just a fair distance away just looking on in complete shock, since he couldn't believe that just a couple of months ago Asta didn't even know exactly that he even had magic, yet here he was contending with someone that even Yuno at his best couldn't beat, as this made Yuno resolve to train even harder so that way he could actually catch up to his rival. As now with the battle completed, this is where we're now going to be able to continue on with the story. So quickly, after healing their wounds from the battle and after making sure that they were alright, as well as also making sure to restrain Mars, this is where we will then see both the Black Bulls and the Golden Dawn then enter inside the treasure room, as just like in the main timeline, they end up gathering all the treasures and making sure to have everything before leaving. We also see Yuno also get like the Wind Spirit, as he ends up getting that spell, but he doesn't know exactly what it is yet, considering the fact that it hasn't awakened, but he had gotten it inside his grimoire for future uses. As then, after making sure that they have everything, they will then leave the dungeon right as it was about to collapse, as we also see Mars also escaping along with his comrades, as they made sure to go back and retrieve him so that way they could use him in the future. As now with the dungeon completed, this is where we would now turn to the end of the arc, as we end up seeing the exact same thing happen just like it does in the main timeline, with Klaus apologizing to both Asta and Yuno, with Asta and Yuno forgiving him, telling him that it was alright, as afterwards we will then see both teams go their separate ways as they report this to their captains, to which their captains then tell them to report it to the Wizard King, as this would actually end up leading us to the very next arc, this being the Royal Capital Assault arc, as we will now turn to it. We first enter with the scene with both Noel as well as Asta arriving at the capital without luck, just like they do in the main timeline, and eventually after walking around for a little bit, they will then encounter the Golden Dawn team, with both of them having a little bit of a quick reunion, with Mimosa revealing her secret to Noel, causing both of them to be blushing and be embarrassed about the fact that Mimosa has a crush on Asta and Noel also, but she doesn't realize it yet, as then afterwards both teams decide to walk together as they go to meet Julius. As now, turning to the very first time they would have their interaction, we will see it play out very similar to that of the main timeline, with of course Julius being very much surprised with Yuno's grimoire and being very impressed about the fact that the Wind Spirit chose him. But when he turned his attention onto Asta, he'll be even more amazed, considering the fact that number one, Asta's grimoire had a unique design, and not only that, but the clover was something that he had never seen before. But the one thing that really got him surprised was the fact of just how much magic that Asta had, as literally just being in Asta's presence, Julius can feel it. Maybe because of the fact that he's been around for quite a long time, or maybe because of the fact that he has quite a lot of experience, but he could tell just how strong Asta is. And not only that, but he could swear he could see Asta's potential. As right in front of Julius, as he ends up looking at Asta, right behind Asta, you could see some type of aura behind him. This aura's color being purple, as you could actually see an individual inside of it. As when Julius ends up taking a look, he would then see an individual staring right at him with Sharingan eyes, and not just regular Sharingan, but the internal Mangekyo, as this person will be staring down Julius, or maybe something more, with Julius actually taking a step back, wondering if all this was nothing more but his imagination, or something way more real. But still nonetheless, this made Julius well enough to be impressed with the two of them, as he ends up complimenting both Asta and Yuno for their achievements, and also complimenting the entirety of their group for a job well done when it came to taking on the dungeon. As after complimenting them and acknowledging their achievements, he would then invite them to the banquet. As I'm now going to turn to the events that end up happening there. So now turning to the events at the banquet, we will then see them kick off very similar to that of the main timeline, as we see Asta and just chilling and eating their food, with every noble there just feeling disgusted about their presence, but being able to tolerate it because of the Wizard King's requests. As both Asta and would be there in their own world, just talking to each other, asking about what type of improvements they're making, with both and Asta actually giving each other ideas about what they should do, with explaining different ideas he could do with his wind magic, and Asta explaining things that he learned about his fire magic, as both of them were having a pretty pleasant talk. Sooner or later, we would also see Mimosa as well as Klaus also get into the conversation, as by this point they would make their own little group. As turning to Noelle, we will see her trying to join them, only to then be stopped by Solid, who ends up dumping water on her and begins to insult her. And not only just Solid, but also Noelle's sister as well, before eventually Noelle decides to finish it all up by telling her to leave. As this will cause Noelle to immediately feel very upset as she prepares to leave, only to then be stopped by Asta. As Asta ends up telling her that they're not going to go anywhere and that they're going to enjoy themselves. As Asta, using his firm control over his magic, this is when suddenly he would then release a warm heat from his hand, as this heat would actually sweep over the entirety of Noelle's body, actually drying up the amount of water that was spilled on her by Solid, allowing her to have completely dried clothes once again, as Asta ends up giving her a plate of food and telling her to go hang out with them. As Noelle, after hearing this and also seeing everything that Asta did, would actually blush very deeply, as she ends up being incredibly thankful towards Asta, as she ends up walking towards the group and standing very close to both Mimosa as well as Asta. As Asta would just be there, closing his eyes and eating his food, acting as if nothing had happened, to which Solid, seeing this, would be very much upset, as he ends up approaching Asta, to which Noelle tries to stop him, but unfortunately she was ignored. As Solid begins to ask Asta exactly who does he think he is, with Asta ignoring Solid, as this is when suddenly a ginormous amount of sand would then wrap around Asta, as the vice captain of the Golden Dawn then decides to intervene, as he would be there to remind Asta his place in this entire banquet, and also telling him to listen to his betters, with Asta not saying anything else, and instead his eyes will be covered by the shade of his hair. And of course, Solid, seeing this, begins to think that Asta is spooked, but he really wanted to make sure that Asta learned his lesson, as he ends up creating a water spear before shooting it at Asta, as everyone could do nothing more but watch as Noelle will cry out in horror, only for everyone to then be surprised. As Asta then mutters underneath his breath that he can't get a single moment of peace, as this is when suddenly flames begin to erupt. These flames are not like the typical flames that Asta usually use. No, these flames were actually a different color, as Asta's flames had changed from the normal orange color that he usually had to a much more of a dark red, as these flames end up burning through the sand armor that was around him, and also ends up evaporating the water spear that was sent towards him, as Asta ends up standing there calmly staring down both of them, as his Sharingan eyes would then be revealed, as he would tell them that if they have a problem with him or his friends being here, then they better be ready to use everything in their power to get them out, because Asta was not leaving, and his friends were not leaving either. As Asta would say this with a look of determination as he stares down the two nobles, and not just them but the rest of them that were there, that were judging him and his friends, as both the vice captain of the Golden Dawn as well as Solid will grow angry as they begin to release a magical pressure, letting Asta know that he's going to deeply regret his actions. But this is when suddenly, as he released that pressure, their pressure would then be dwarfed by something else, by Asta's pressure, as he begins to release a pressure so powerful that spreads across the entirety of the banquet and actually shakes up the entirety of the area that they were in. As Asta lets them know that if they're going to try their best to get them out of here, they best go for the kill. Since by this point now, Asta has stopped playing games. He was not going to hold back anymore, especially when it came to them. As Asta's pressure by this point was so powerful, they had many of the Magic Knights on their knees, including Solid and his sister, as both of them can't believe that they were actually kneeling to a commoner's magical power, as even the vice captain of the Golden Dawn was sweating, as he actually felt very hesitant to attack Asta at this very moment, as Asta was staring them down with his Sharingan eyes blazing, as he was ready to completely crash out at this very moment. But just as it was happening though, this is when suddenly Noelle would then intervene, saying that it was his turn now, as he begins to release his own pressure. As Asta would actually be surprised as Nozelle's pressure would actually begin to rival his, as it actually begins to shake up the entirety of the banquet, but yet even after facing such strong pressure, Asta was not going to back down. In fact, he only just continued amping up his magic, with Noelle doing the same thing, with both of these magical pressures crashing into each other and actually doing so much damage to the surrounding area that you could actually see the walls of the banquet beginning to crumble due to it. as they had gotten so bad that even Asta's friends were telling him to stop, with Asta not being able to listen to them, as by this point he was just completely locked into some type of battle mode, as he was fully willing to actually straight up and attack the captain of the Silver Eagles, with Nozel also seemingly preparing for combat as well, being the fact that he was gathering magic into what seemed to be some type of offensive spell. As right as the two of them were about to duke it out, this is when suddenly Figolion would then intervene, as he ends up stopping everything, releasing his own pressure and telling them to cease their actions. As Figolion's interruption would cause both Asta as well as Nozel to then release their pressure, as Figolion begins to explain to them that they were not acting in a proper manner and explains to them exactly how they need to behave as a magic knight. But as he was explaining this to them, this is when suddenly a knight would actually just burst into the room, catching all their attentions. He ends up explaining that the royal capital was actually under assault, causing everyone to be surprised before suddenly flames would erupt throughout the entirety of the capital, as we end up seeing hordes of undead actually beginning to attack civilians, where everyone can do nothing more but just look on in complete shock. As this is where we're now going to cover the events that end up taking place here, as we now turn to it. So after realizing that the Clover Kingdom was under attack, all the magic knights would immediately begin to try to come up with a plan in order to solve the entirety of the situation. However, as they were doing so, this is when Yuna would then see Asta begin to leave on his own, with Yuna asking Asta if he really plans to go out there and just take on the enemies by himself. With Asta, after hearing this, just stopping for a moment, as he then turns back to Yuno, as he then tells him that unfortunately at this very moment, they can't exactly be going with a plan during the time of crisis, since after all, people are out there and people could be dying for all they know, all the while they're up here trying to make plans. And Asta was not going to let that happen, not as long as he was here. As after saying those words, Asta would then dash off towards the area where all the chaos was happening, with Leopold as well as Noel trying to track him as they then follow along, with the rest of the magic knights actually being there, but some of them actually took Asta's words to heart. As this is when we would then see actually half of the people there then decide to go out and help out, considering the fact that what Asta said was technically quite true, considering the fact that some people could actually be dying while they were here planning and strategizing. Now, this will cause Figolion to then look around, as he can't help but wonder if maybe Asta was right, but still nonetheless, he'll begin to explain a plan with the rest of the magic knights, as we will now turn our attention back to Asta. Turning to Asta, we will see him currently right now dashing throughout the entirety of the capital, taking care of hordes of undead with his fire magic and making sure that people got to safety. But while in the process of doing this, as Asta will be making sure to, help a bunch of people, this is when he would then encounter Rades, as he was about to attack a little girl. And this will cause Asta to immediately grow angry, as this is when suddenly Asta will then create a flaming arrow and shoot it directly into the shoulder of Rades, as he will be blasted directly into a wall, as he ends up screaming out in pain as he literally feels the flaming arrow just burning intensely into his shoulders, as he'll be cursing up a storm. As Asta, after seeing that Rades was a fair distance away from the little girl, this is when he ends up approaching her, making sure that she was alright, to which she ends up thanking him, as Asta would then approach Rades with a cold gaze. Now Rades eventually, after seeing that the magic arrow had finally, died out and everything, this is when he would then tell Asta that he'll pay for it, as he would then try using his magic to create one of his summons, as he would end up summoning out one of his undead creations, as he ends up explaining to Asta that he stands no chance against it, only to then be surprised, as this is when Asta would then reveal another one of his, new magic spells that he had learned, or better yet, that he had created, as he ends up summoning out a tornado of fire that rises from the ground, as it ends up enveloping the undead creature that was summoned and just completely burning it to a crisp. As Rades, seeing this, couldn't believe the fact that one of his best creations was destroyed so easily. But right as he was thinking this though, after making sure that the undead was defeated, this is when Asta would then actually end up creating a sword using his fire magic. And Rades, seeing this, would then tell Asta to calm down, trying to negotiate with him, but unfortunately it was too late, as Asta, using his speed, was able to blitz Rades and immediately was able to cut him, not kill him, but actually wound him enough to the point where he falls into unconsciousness just due to the sheer pain of the attack. As right after defeating Repchi, we will then see the hordes of undead attacking the entirety of the capital actually begin to die down, as now with Repchi unconscious, that meant that they no longer had a magic source to really operate from, as Asta had put an end to the invasion. So now, as Asta ends up making sure that Repchi is captured in order to get interrogated later, and also after making sure that the little girl is safe, this is when he would then be approached by both Noel as well as Leopold, as they end up arriving there to see the amazing display that Asta had left behind, as they end up complimenting Asta, with Leopold firmly declaring that Asta was his rival, to which Asta just ends up accepting and just agreeing with it casually, as the three of them then begin to get into conversation before eventually Figolion would then arrive. Now when Figolion ends up seeing Revchi on the ground defeated as well as restrained, he ends up complimenting Asta, as by this point it seemed as if everything was finally about to come to an end, but unfortunately it wasn't going to be that way, as this is when as Figolion was approaching Asta and the rest of them, this is when suddenly he would then fall into a portal, or at least he was about to. As right as the portal had opened up underneath Figolion's feet, Asta was able to immediately get into action, grabbing Figolion's arm and tossing him out of the portal, but at the cost of himself. As Asta ends up falling into the portal, as he ends up telling everyone that it was going to be alright, as everyone would call out his name. As Asta would just fall into the portal, leaving Figolion, Leopold, and Noelle by themselves. As this is when more portals begin to open up as mages begin to appear, as they begin to surround the three, with every last one of them preparing for combat. As turning our attention to Asta, after he fell into the portal, we will see him arrive at the hideout of the Eye of the Midnight Sun, as he would be there unaware about exactly where he was, until this is when he would then encounter an individual. Now Asta was not able to get a good look at him, but this would be his very first time encountering him, as unaware to him was the fact that this was the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun, Licht. As Licht would be there looking at Asta impatiently, with Asta asking him questions as to where he was and everything, until suddenly this is when Asta would then feel a sharp pain in his right thigh. As he ends up looking at it, only to see a light spear had stabbed right into it. As in response to this, Asta ends up gritting his teeth at the pain that he was feeling, as this is when he would then hear the leader speaking, as he ends up explaining to Asta that unfortunately he's already seen way too much, and for interfering in their plans that he's going to have to eliminate him. And Asta hearing this immediately begins to activate the Sharingan, as he ends up already revealing that he's not going to go without a fight, as this is when the fight between both Asta and the leader would then begin. As Asta would shoot out a ginormous fireball as his first attack, but unfortunately for Licht it was way too slow, as he's easily able to dodge out of the attack with Asta being surprised. As although using the Sharingan he's able to keep up with the speed of Licht, unfortunately his body wasn't able to react quickly enough. So that meant that no matter how hard Asta tried, unfortunately he could never actually hit the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun. As by the time that Licht was finally done attacking Asta, we would see him littered with a bunch of different wounds, as he'll be bleeding by quite a lot, as you could see Asta now currently right now on his last legs. As he'll be staring at Licht, with Licht calmly floating towards him, as this is when he would then summon out another light spear before putting it directly at Asta's face, telling him that he shouldn't feel upset, saying that now this would mark a very new beginning, not only for, Asta, but for the entirety of the human race. As Asta would do nothing more but just stare at Licht impatiently, as this is when suddenly Licht would then thrust the light spear directly into Asta's face. As just like that would be the end for Asta, as we end up seeing his body then collapse down to the ground, as Licht will look at the scene with an uncaring gaze, not at all caring about the brutal display that he left behind. As Licht ends up telling Asta that if he wants to blame anyone for this, he should blame just the entirety of the universe for making him be born a human. As after that, this is when Licht would then suddenly end up disappearing in a flash of light, leaving Asta's body there as it begins to deteriorate. However, as we end up looking at Asta's body though, this is when we would then see something surprising, as suddenly, this is where we would then see the entirety of the, brutalized body of Asta then disappear right in front of our eyes, as instead it would then be revealed that Asta was actually far away from the scene and actually hiding in the corner, as he can't help but be there taking heavy breaths as he wonders what the heck just happened. You see, right at that instance, as we now do a flashback, as Licht had pointed the light spear directly into Asta's face and begins to explain to him about how he's going to finish him off and everything, this is when at that moment Asta's Sharingan eyes actually did something. Now Asta couldn't exactly explain what it did, but the next thing Asta knew was the fact that Licht was in some type of daze. He wasn't moving and he wasn't even talking either. He was just calmly just pointing the light spear at Asta. Now Asta would be there wondering what was going on, as it seems to be like Licht was in some type of trance, but seeing the opportunity he immediately took it as he dashed off, leaving a fire clone there as he ends up hiding behind a wall. Now as this was going on, eventually Licht was finishing off the fire clone and everything, as after seeing that Asta had supposedly died, he would then head off, leaving Asta there as he wonders exactly what did he do. As Asta thinks about it, this is when he would then look at a nearby puddle to see that his Sharingan eyes were still blazing, as he realized that he still hasn't learned all too much about their abilities and what exactly they're fully capable of, as Asta resolved to learn more about it after this was over with. But just as he was thinking about this is when suddenly Asta would then feel a presence right beside him, as he ends up turning his attention to look at it, only to see none other than Julius, as Julius had arrived just fortunately in the nick of time. as Julius ends up looking at Asta, incredibly injured and everything, asking him if he was alright, with Asta telling him that he's gonna live. With Julius, after hearing this, just smiling at Asta's just sheer determination and will to live, as this is when he would then tap Asta on the shoulder before eventually he ends up teleporting them both back to the Clover Kingdom. As now, doing a quick change of scenes, we will now turn to when Julius as well as Asta arrive at the Clover Kingdom, as by this point now, all the Magic Knights were there, as they'll be surrounding the two of them, asking them what went down, with Asta, being put on the ground gently, as Asta, just walks back to his friends, who end up asking him a bunch of questions, as they were really worried for his safety after he fell into the portal, with Asta saying that it was alright, as Julius then actually tells them about all the information that he had gathered when he was away, and also informing them about the Eye of the Midnight Sun. As the rest of the announcement will play out exactly as it did in the main timeline, before eventually Julius would then tell them to remain strong and to keep up the good work, as after that all the Magic Knights would then go their separate ways. Now also during this time he stayed a little bit at the capital to get healed of course, but eventually he did end up leaving with his squad, as during the time as they were leaving, they would then encounter the Golden Dawn team, as just like it did in the main timeline, Yuno tries to show off Asta his new power up, with Asta showing Yuno that he wasn't slouching either, as he was immediately able to actually block the spell that Yuno sent towards him, and telling Yuno that the next time that they will see each other, that he will be even stronger than before, with Yuno telling him the same thing, as after that both squads will then go their separate ways, as we now maneuver into the next arc, this being the Eye of the Midnight Sun encounter arc. So the arc kicks off with a pretty wide time skip, as we actually see a month go by after the events of the Royal Capital Assault. As during this time, as we turn our attention to Asta, we will see that throughout the month, Asta had been focusing mostly on just training and experimenting with his Sharingan and his magic, while at the same time he'll be taking missions, as this actually really helped with his training, and not only that but also helped him gather more money to send back to the orphanage. Also during this time, as we now turn back to the present, we would see Asta in the midst of training, as this is when he would then be invited by Finral to go to the mixer. As the events that end up happening there would play out very similar to that of the main timeline, with the only difference here being the fact that Asta has a way better time than he did in the main timeline. Considering the fact that Asta was actually able to communicate with Rebecca much easier, considering the fact that both of them actually end up expressing about the fact that they had siblings, and overall how both of them had to play the role as an older sibling basically. So that meant that Asta was actually able to have a pretty good time, before it was interrupted by the drunken man. As afterwards, we will then see a bunch of things play out the exact same way, as Asta would go visit Rebecca and her siblings, they would have a pretty fun time, Ghosh would go over there and try to pick a fight with Asta just knocking him out, considering the fact that he was putting kids' lives at risk, all because of the fact that he was jealous, and overall things begin to have a pretty nice and wholesome time. Until eventually we would then turn to the very main event of it all, this being the time when the kids will be captured. As Asta would end up waking up in the dead of the night, and after once again just slapping Ghosh away, this is when he would then exit out to see that it was snowing, which was weird and also completely off, as he could already tell that something was wrong by the fact that his magic was reacting violently to it, kind of rejecting the snow. As this is when the rest of the parents would then get out, as well as Rebecca, as they all end up explaining to Asta that their kids were missing, causing Asta to be very pissed off, as the sister would then get out as well, explaining to Asta that there seemed to be some type of mind control magic inside the snow. Now when Asta heard this, he was very much pissed off, as his Sharingan eyes would then begin to glow. But as he was thinking about all this stuff, this is when suddenly Noelle would then make her appearance known, as just like she does in the main timeline, she was following Asta throughout the entirety of this time, as this is when she would then reveal exactly where she last saw the kids. And when Asta heard this, he then immediately turned his attention back over there, as this is when he would then do a couple of stretching exercises, as this is when he then lets everyone know that he's gonna go get the kids back, while also telling the sister as well as Noelle to call for backup from the Magic Knights. Now although the sister tries to accompany Asta, this is when Asta would tell her to stay here, as this was going to be something that was going to be very quick. As Asta then decides to try to test out something, as in the very next second, all of them could swear that they seen Asta just disappear in a flash of light, as the last thing you would actually see when you end up looking at the spot that Asta was in was a very dark mark on the ground, as the only person that was able to really keep track of it was none other than the sister, as she could have sworn she saw something incredible, as she wonders who exactly was this child, and exactly what type of origins or upbringing did he have to make him be able to do something like that with his magic. As turning our attention to Asta, we will see him arrive at the location where the kids were held captive, as it only took him 50 seconds to arrive there with the new way that he used his magic. As Asta would end up arriving there, he would then see one of Rebecca's siblings on the ground, as using his Sharingan he's easily able to break the kid out of the illusion. Now the kid will wake up out of it both confused and scared as he ends up asking Asta what was going on, with Asta telling him that everything was going to be fine. As Asta ends up using his magic to heat up the kid's body, since it seemed as if the kid was actually getting a little bit of frostbite due to being in the cold for who knows how long. And this only made Asta even more angrier at the people who caused all this, as he would then summon out a fire clone telling it to take the kid back, to which it would do so. As right before the kid would leave, he would actually wish Asta some good luck, with Asta sending him a thumbs up right before the kid would be taken away. As this is where we would then see Asta enter inside the cave with a look of seriousness that he never showed before, as this is where we would now turn our attention to both Niche and Baro. Now, as the two of them were in there, just basically going on with their plans and schemes, this is where they would then feel it, a pressure like no other, as some type of eerie energy begins to leak from one of the holes in the cave, as they wonder just what the heck was going on, as both of them can firmly believe in their mind that this was not magic, it was something else, something much more sinister. As this is when the individual that was walking would then reveal himself to be none other than Asta, as Asta would then stare down both Niche and Baro with his Sharingan eyes blazing, as this is when he then calmly lets them know to say their final words. As Asta, using his flame magic, would then create a flaming sword as he points it at them, letting them know that this will be their grave, and they better be ready to take their last breath. To which both Niche and Baro can do nothing more but actually shake at the thought, as they could just feel this intimidating energy just releasing off of Asta in spades, as this is when Baro would then order Niche to attack Asta, to which he would do so, as he would summon out a bunch of snowmen to attack Asta, but unfortunately it was all pointless. As right as the snowmen were all gathering around Asta, and right as they were about to hit him, all of them would then just be immediately just put up to blaze, as they'll be melted into nothingness thanks to Asta's magic, as he approaches them calmly. He's not even running by this point, he's literally just walking. Now Niche will be doing everything in his magic to stop Asta, but it was pointless, as by the time that Asta was right in front of Niche, he just simply would backhand the kid in the face, sending him flying and crashing into a wall. As Asta wasn't even paying attention to Niche, no, he was paying attention to Baro, as by this point Asta he was smart enough to tell who was pulling the strings. Now Baro, seeing this, would take a step back, ordering Asta to stand down, but Asta wasn't listening, as in the very next second, Asta would then disappear right before Baro's eyes, before suddenly Baro would then get hit with a nasty sword slash across the stomach, as he then gets sent flying and crashing into a wall as well, as he would fall into unconsciousness just due to the sheer pain of getting cut by a flaming sword, as he was lucky enough to be alive. As he would end up falling into unconsciousness while coughing up blood, he can't help but wonder who exactly was this guy, and more precisely just what was that energy, since Baro had a magical device to tell him exactly how much mana someone had, but when he looked at Asta, he saw something else, and something that was most definitely not mana. As soon afterwards, after making sure that both enemies were knocked out and no longer a threat, this is when Asta would then suddenly summon out a generous amount of fire clones, as well as using his Sharingan to break all the kids out of their illusions. Now, once after seeing all the kids are free from their illusions, Asta would use the fire clones to not only heat up the kids' bodies that have been, very much damaged from the cold, but he also used his clones to take them back to safety. Which, yes, it did cost Asta a lot of energy, but still nonetheless, he had to make sure that they were safe. As eventually, after making sure that all the kids were taken to safety, this is where we can see Asta finally take a breather, as he ends up relaxing for a little bit, only to then stop as a pressure begins to fill in the entirety of the cave. As this is when suddenly Asta's senses begin to go haywire, as he senses an attack coming from behind, as he summons out a flaming sword, as he counters the attack with him gritting his teeth, as he's getting very much annoyed about what's going on. As this is when Asta would then look up into the sky to see none other than the man he had fought previously before, and the one that he lost to. As the leader of the Midnight Sun would make his arrival known, with him telling Asta that it's a surprise to see that he was still alive, but telling him that he won't make the same mistake twice. Now Asta, seeing this, would then grit his teeth before smirking, as now this was now a perfect opportunity, as after all he has been training extremely hard, so it's about time that he sees exactly how far has he grown, as this is where Asta knows that he can go all out without consequences, and especially since all the kids were gone. As this is where we then see Asta then begin to raise up a large amount of magic energy, or supposedly magic energy, as this is where he then tells the leader of the Midnight Sun that things are going to end way differently compared to how it did last time, as the fight between Asta versus the leader of the Midnight Sun would then begin. The fight would first start off with Asta, as we see him avoiding all the light spears getting sent towards him, as thanks to all the training he's been doing, he's been able to improve his body speed, allowing for him to avoid the attacks much easier than he did before. With Licht seeing this, being very much impressed and even complimenting Asta for his growth and power, but this is when he would then tell Asta that it wouldn't be enough, as he ends up disappearing before appearing behind Asta and trying to slice him in half with a light spear. But to Licht's surprise, Asta would then be revealed to be nothing more but a flaming clone, as the real Asta would then be above Licht as he ends up shooting off a generous fireball towards him, with Licht feeling the heat immediately dodging out of the way as he turns to see Asta still up in the air. Summoning out another light spear, he would then rush at Asta, with Asta seeing this with his Sharingan immediately summoning out a flaming sword, as both blades would then end up crashing with each other, causing a generous shockwave throughout the entirety of the cave, as Asta will be trying his best, trying to push Licht away, with Licht also trying his best, as it ends up ending with a draw, as we would end up seeing the both of them separate from each other as they try to regain their balance. As Asta, after looking at Licht and after looking at his flaming sword, this is when he would then sigh as he then reveals to Licht that he was kind of hoping to beat him without truly going all out. And Licht, hearing this, would then scoff at the idea as he begins to ask Asta if he truly believes that he can beat him, with Asta looking at Licht then smirking as he then tells him that he most definitely can. As this is when Asta would then suddenly begin to generate large amounts of magic. As this is where Asta would then explain to Licht that after those moments in the capital that he trained himself really hard in order to actually be able to find a way to beat Licht in his speed. And currently right now, finally Asta had a way to do it. As this is when, as we turn our attention to Asta, we will see him then surrounded with a generous amount of flames before suddenly these flames would then disperse. As in the very next second, we would then hear static as actual lightning then begins to form around Asta, as this is when Asta then reveals to Licht his new power up, with Licht being completely caught off guard as this was not what he was expecting, as this should be impossible, but yet here it was in front of him. Asta had pushed his control over his magic and just his understanding of it to the absolute next level, as Asta had found some way to actually turn his flames into lightning, as this is when Asta would then let Licht know that now he's going to be able to compete with him on equal footing, as round 2 of Asta versus the leader of the Eye of the Midnight Sun would then begin. As we start off with Licht as he would try attacking Asta by cutting him in half using a light spear, only to then be surprised as Asta would then suddenly disappear right in front of his eyes, as he couldn't even keep track of him. As Licht would try to look around, this is when suddenly he would then be punched in the face by Asta, who appears right beside him, before disappearing and then appearing on the other side as he ends up kicking Licht into the air. As in the very next instance, this is when Licht will then see, as he'll be bouncing all over the place as Asta is disappearing and appearing in different sorts of areas, as he couldn't keep up with Asta's speed. He was completely shocked since this never happened before, as he was actually being outclassed when it came to speed. But eventually, after regaining his bearings, he would then once again gain control as he summons out a generous horde of light spears, telling Asta to stay down, as Asta, seeing all these light spears, would actually dodge out of the way of every last one of them. Even in point blank range, Asta was able to dodge, as this lightning was really giving him the boost that he needed. As right as Licht was truly getting tired of Asta, telling him that he had enough, this is when suddenly he would then feel an attack approaching from underneath him, as he then sees a fireball rushing towards him. But fortunately, it was way too slow in Licht's eyes as he ends up smirking, trying to dodge out of the way, only to then be surprised. As when he tried dodging to the right, this is when he would then see a dragon flame bomb rushing towards him. As he tried to dodge to the left, this is when he would then be surprised to see another dragon flame bomb. As Licht would then look around, this is when he would then be surprised. Somehow, some way, in the spare time that he was trying to, tell Asta that he had enough, Asta was able to summon out a generous amount of fireballs as each one of them were heading towards Licht's direction. As Licht would try dodging out of the way, but unfortunately, he was too focused on his mind that unfortunately he was not able to dodge out of everything, as he gets bombarded by a bunch of fireballs from all angles. As when we end up seeing Licht once again, he'll be heavily burnt, as you could see that by this point now he has been severely damaged, but it wasn't enough. As this is when Licht would then look up into the sky to see Asta as he was literally running on the wall, as we could actually see that something dangerous was in his hand, a new attack. As Asta had generated a generous amount of lightning into the palm of his hand, as he would actually be running the lightning through the walls of the cave, destroying it, as this is when he would then rush at Licht, which thanks to his newly acquired speed, it was relatively easy to do so. As this is when suddenly Asta would then shout out the name of the attack, this being Chidori, as he ends up slamming it directly into Licht's stomach, as Licht would cough up large amounts of blood, as he would then be slammed into the very ground of the cave, as he'll be caved into it. As the entirety of the cave would then shake from the impact, with it getting severely damaged just due to the blow that Asta had landed. As by the time the dust had settled, we would then see Asta as he stands victorious over Licht, as he ends up telling Licht and reminding him what he said earlier, as he had proven to Licht that yes, he really could beat him this time. As now with Licht defeated, this is where we would then see Asta then put him under a genjutsu, as by this point now, Licht was way too weak to resist it, as now Asta can finally take Licht back for questioning. as it seemed as if the mission was finally over with, or at least that's what Asta had thought. As right before Asta could take Licht away for questioning, this is when suddenly a portal would then open up, as Veto, Fauna, as well as Raya would then suddenly end up bursting out of the portal as they then rush at Asta, with Veto swinging a beast claw directly into Asta's face, or at least he tried to, before another portal would then open up as Yami and Finro would then rush out, with Yami of course blocking the blow. As from then on, the rest of the events that end up taking place here will play out pretty similar to that of the main timeline, as we end up seeing, Yami defend against the Third Eye before the rest of the captains would also end up arriving there as well. As, like I said, everything ends up playing out, including with Licht escaping, as unfortunately Asta was not able to help out too much considering the fact that he was exhausted after facing off against Licht by himself earlier, as well as also helping the kids to escape by himself, as Asta literally had done basically all the work and they only just now arrived to clean up everything else that just happened. But still nonetheless, Asta had worked hard during this arc, as even though the Midnight Sun had escaped, he had put the leader out of commission for quite a while, so that was a good thing at least. As this would actually conclude the Midnight Sun encounter arc, as we see Asta return back to the village, to which he would be very much thanked by Rebecca, who ends up kissing Asta on her cheek, much to Noelle's dismay. As afterwards, this is where we will now maneuver into the next arc, as we will now do a time skip. So now, flashing forward to the next couple of weeks that go by, we will see Asta during this time as he will be making major improvements. As you see, while at the same time he'll be training, he would actually be improving his gear, as Asta realized that he needed an upgrade, as after the battle against Licht, his clothing was so damaged enough to the point where it couldn't be recovered. So realizing that he needed an upgraded gear, he decided to do just that, as after all, he still had quite a large amount of money that he saved up, even though he's been giving most of it to Hodge Village, as Asta had been using the money he had left over to actually buy himself some new clothes, this being long black pants, some brown boots, and not only that but also getting a hilt for his new katana. As yes, Asta was finally able to buy himself a katana, as he asked Yami for help on this one, to which Yami at first thought that Asta didn't have the money, but to his surprise, he actually did. While at the same time, we also see a change in Asta's robe, as instead of having like the small robe that he usually has like in the main timeline, in this robe he actually has a much longer one, similar to that of a cape, that also accompanies a hoodie with it. So clearly Asta had gotten a major drip upgrade. But that was not the only thing, as we also see Asta carrying a bunch of items that were just useful in certain situations, as he'll be carrying things such as a magical communicative device, and also things such as daggers and knives, just in case he would lose his katana or he were to run out of magic. Basically, Asta always had a way to continue on fighting. But that was not the only thing that Asta was doing throughout the weeks, as you also see that during this time he would do the same thing that he did in the main timeline and help out Julius find out who the traitor was among the captains, to which it was none other than the captain of the Purple Orcas. As right after capturing the traitor and making sure to question him, this is when Julius would then give the mission to the Black Bulls about hunting down the magic stones, to which of course Yami would accept this mission, as we end up seeing Asta as well as the rest of the Black Bulls then go to the beach in order to complete the mission at the Seabed Temple. As now, turning to the events that end up happening there, we will see most of it start off exactly as it does in the main timeline, as Asta most of this time would just be chilling, as eventually we will then turn to the more important stuff, as this will be when the games would actually begin and all the Black Bulls are in there, facing off against their own separate enemies. Now Asta during this point, thanks to him growing so powerful by this point, he's actually able to deal with all the enemies that come his way. But just as things were beginning to actually settle down, and just as the Black Bulls were about to win their matches, this is when suddenly Veto would then arrive. And Veto's presence would actually end up shaking up the entirety of the games, as this is when Yami would then order all of them to take this very seriously. And Asta, after hearing this, says nothing more, as immediately using his magic he would begin to spread it all around, as he ends up locating where Veto is. As Asta's eyes would then narrow, as this is when suddenly he would then begin to gather up electricity, as he would then disappear. Turning back to Veto, we will see him as he'll be dogging both Magma as well as Luck, as they'll be trying their very best to win against him, but unfortunately even though they tried their best, it still wasn't enough. As Veto would be there laughing, as he ends up stating that this was going to be the end for them, as he tries to just finish them both off. This is when, to his surprise, as he swings his beast claw towards them, they will then disappear. As in the very next second, he will then hear static behind him as he turns around to see none other than Asta, as he had arrived just at the nick of time, as he ends up setting both Magma and Luck down on the ground gently, telling them that they were amazing and that he was very happy to have both of them as his superiors, before letting them know that he would take care of the rest. Now, of course, Veto seeing Asta would be actually very happy, as he ends up telling Asta that he's going to make him pay for what he did to Licht, But Asta didn't care about that, as instead Asta just calmly looked at Veto with an impassive gaze, as he would then just calmly walk towards him as he casually pulls out his katana, letting Veto know now that unfortunately this was not going to be some type of grand fight, this wasn't going to be something amazing, nah, this was going to be just plain and simple, because all Asta had to do was just kill him. And Veto, after hearing Asta's firm declaration, he immediately began to laugh, telling Asta that he's going to make sure that he truly tastes his despair, as he would then rush at Asta with a beast claw, trying to stab into him, only to then be surprised as Asta would be easily able to avoid the attack and also appear right behind him. As this is when Asta would then take a few steps forward, before suddenly Veto would then feel it, multiple slash marks across all of his body, as each one of them would be stinging, as we could actually see that lightning was infused into the attack. As in that split second, Asta had released a whirlwind of slashes across Veto's body, as Veto couldn't believe the fact that he couldn't even keep up with him, as this is when he didn't realize exactly how Asta was able to beat Licht. But even then, he didn't really care, since after all, he still had way much more to offer, as he then tells Asta that all he did was got lucky, but Asta tells Veto to shut up and fight. As this is where the fight between the two of them would truly begin, as Veto begins charging at Asta with beast claws, with Asta just being there, as by this point now he's not even running towards Veto. Nah, he's just casually just standing there, waiting for Veto to come to him. As right as Veto would appear right in front of Asta, and right as he would swing two beast claws towards him, this is when suddenly Asta would then unsheath his katana once again. As moving so fast that Veto couldn't react, this is when suddenly Veto would then get two large slash marks across his chest that would actually reach all the way up to his shoulders, as he ends up coughing up a large amount of blood, as the attacks that he threw out would go completely off target and end up crashing into the ground behind Asta. As by this point now, Veto is on his knees by this point, as he's literally reeling back from the pain. As Asta, looking at this, would then calmly walk towards Veto, giving him a small pat on the cheek, telling him that he can do way better than that. With Veto, of course, hearing this, getting extremely pissed off, as he would swing at Asta only to then miss. As for the next few moments, we would then see both Asta and Veto just simply exchanging blows, with Veto not being able to land a single one on Asta, as Asta had already shown what exactly the gap between them really is. As Veto, growing so tired of this, would then immediately begin to go on a whole tantrum basically, as he decides to just destroy the entirety of the area that they were in. But as he would do this, and as he will be, causing a generous amount of destruction, this is when Asta would then see the opening. Charging up the Chidori, this is where we would then see Asta begin to release a whole new stream of attacks, as to Veto's surprise, Asta begins to release an onslaught of Chidoris, as he begins just ripping through Veto's body, with him being unable to do anything. As if you guys want a reference, think of it as when Minato does the flying Raijin, like in the Naruto Ninja Storm games. But the thing is, for this version, instead of using the flying Raijin, it's the Chidori, as Asta will be using this technique to immediately just completely obliterate Veto, as by the time he finally finished the onslaught, we will see Veto's body damaged beyond repair. As right before Veto can do anything else, this would be where Asta would then suddenly finish him off by stabbing the Chidori directly into his chest, before slamming him into the wall with it, as Veto can do nothing more, as the attack would seemingly pierce his heart and finish him off completely. As after seeing that his enemy was now defeated, this is where Asta would then release the attack, as Veto's body would then collapse down to the ground. As now with Veto defeated, this is where Asta would then go off to check on his comrades, only to see both Noelle and Kawano then pull up onto the scene. As Kawano, using her singing magic, she's able to heal up both Luck and Magma, but unfortunately the two of them were still unconscious, which was alright, considering the fact that they deserved the rest. As Asta was feeling quite happy about everything, considering the fact that none of this ended with one of his friends dying. But just as Asta was thinking this though, this is when suddenly Veto would then awaken his third eye, as this will cause him to then begin the self-destruct procedure, as he wasn't going to be fighting anyone considering the fact that he was knocked unconscious, but he was going to self-destruct, as this will cause everyone to panic, including Yami, as he ends up bursting out of the barrier using his new spell, as he ends up rushing over there in order to save his squad. And Asta, being the one who was the closest to the explosion, you would think he would feel fear or anything like that, but instead he doesn't, as Asta would be listening to something else. As currently right now, Asta will be hearing words be told into his head, as these words would just be, repeated over and over again, as this is when suddenly Asta would then gain a look of determination, as he would then utter the words, Amaterasu. As after saying these words, Asta's eyes really began to hurt, as they actually begin to bleed, as this is when suddenly black flames begin to sprout out all across Veto, as they'll be burning him and his magic to an absolute crisp, until eventually there'll be nothing left behind. as all of them that were there that was witnessing this will be looking on in complete shock. Although Asta, he'll be taking very heavy breaths, as by this point now his vision begins to seem very blurry as he feels exhausted. Whatever the heck he just used right now took up nearly all his energy. As when we end up taking a good look at Asta's eyes, we will see that the Sharingan eyes has shifted from the regular 3 Tomoe into that of the Mangekyo. As Asta, after staring at the scene before him one last time, this is when Asta will then say one final goodbye to Veto before suddenly collapsing down to the ground and falling into unconsciousness. As seeing this, both Noel as well as Kano would then rush towards him in order to check if he was okay. As afterwards, this is where we're now gonna do another time skip. So now flashing forward to after the events that transpired, we end up seeing Asta once again, as by this point now we will see him eventually finally get the magic stone as Nero had retrieved it for him, and then soon afterwards him and the Black Bulls would be finally able to leave the Seabed temple, as they end up returning back to the surface before reporting this to Julius and giving him the magic stone, who ends up complimenting them for their achievements. As after this, I'm just gonna skim forward with the story a little bit, mostly because of the fact that thanks to Asta not having his arms broken, that meant that we don't even have to go to the Witch's Forest. And if you're wondering about the events that transpired there, I don't really want to tell you this, but ain't no way they're gonna get the magic stone from the Queen of Witches. For those that have read the manga, you should know that they're not gonna be able to do it, especially even at this point of the story. There was no way they're gonna be able to take on the Queen of Witches. So we can basically ignore whatever happens at the Witch's Forest. Instead, we could actually focus on Asta and also the rest of the Black Bulls, as during this time they actually get a little bit of chance of rest, mostly because of the fact that Julius realized that the Seabed temple took quite a lot out of them, so he gives them an opportunity to rest and enjoy themselves, to which Asta obviously uses this as a way to train. Ever since the events at the Seabed temple, Asta realized that his Sharingan had went through another evolution, and not only that, but he also realized that he had gained a new ability, the control of black flames. But the thing is, he wasn't exactly too used to the idea just yet. The first time he used it back in the temple, he literally almost lost all his magic energy on the first time using it. That was the reason why he fell into unconsciousness. So due to that, Asta had to learn to build up his reserves, or more precisely, learn how to endure like the strain of using it, to which that was going to take a while. But fortunately, he had more than enough time on his hands thanks to the free time. But that was not the only thing that Asta was doing. He was also trying to figure out exactly who was the voice that he heard back then. As he wasn't dumb and he wasn't going to ignore it, he most definitely heard someone calling out to him and telling him to say those words. But the real question was, who was the one to tell him to do that? As Asta had been making multiple theories, as the one thing he could really think of was that it laid within the grimoire, as that was so far the only thing that really connected as to what happened during that moment. But the more times as Asta would think about this, he would be much more unaware about the facts about what things were happening inside the Black Bulls, as many of them quickly came to the realization that Asta was slowly actually getting out of their league. I mean, in the very beginning, Asta was actually telling them that he didn't have magic for quite a long time, so due to that, they at first thought that Asta was going to be someone who, although was going to work hard, was still going to be on their level for a very long time. But to their surprise, Asta was easily able to catch up to them, before eventually even surpassing them, as they had no way to react to it. In that moment when it came to Asta facing up against Veto, it really clicked with the Black Bulls just how far Asta had came, and this will cause them to actually feel a little bit worthless. But yet, even though Asta had surpassed many of the Black Bulls in strength, he didn't at all hold it above them. In fact, he even tried encouraging them to train and even gave them some advice. So thanks to this, we would actually see that during this time span, we will see many of the Black Bulls also training in private, as although they're not as passionate as Asta, they would still end up trying their hardest in order to reach a new level of strength. And they owe it all to Asta, considering the fact that he's always there to give them advice or to even become like a training partner basically. So yeah, we will see improvements for both Asta as well as the rest of the Black Bulls, as this will go on all the way until the point of the Royal Magic Knights arc, as this is where we end up seeing all the Black Bulls just simply enjoying themselves after taking care of so many missions by this point, as they decide to actually celebrate a little bit of a festival. But while there, this is when they will then announce the Magic Knight rankings, to which the Black Bulls are obviously in first place in this timeline, as they actually were able to beat the Golden Dawn thanks to all the Black Bulls actually trying harder and thanks to Asta going on way more missions. As this would surprise everyone, as he can't believe that the Black Bulls were actually able to beat the Golden Dawn. But then soon afterwards, after the whole rankings were over, this is when they would then announce the Royal Magic Knight exams, so which will cause everyone to be very much excited and Asta and Yuno to then smirk, as they most definitely knew that that was going to be the moment where they really get the opportunity to actually test themselves. As now with the announcements completed, this is where we're going to have a little bit of a brief time skip for all the teams to actually train themselves up, as we will now turn to the events that take place at the Royal Magic Night exams. As kicking off the exams, we will see that the very first few portions of it would remain pretty similar to that of the main timeline, as we end up seeing that the outcome of these matches would not change too much and nothing really drastic ends up, happening throughout these exams. It's only when we near the end of it where things begin to go crazy, as it will be during the time when Finral loses to Longoris and would be put in a near-death state. As right as Longoris was about to finish off Finral, that's when the Black Bulls would then rush over to save him, but Asta decided to take it a step further. As after arriving there, making sure to stop Longoris from moving, this is when, to Longoris' surprise, he would actually end up feeling a cut on his cheek, as somehow someway Asta had been able to land an attack without Longoris even noticing it. As this is when Asta would then give Longoris the warning, saying that if he were to take a little bit of a step forward, or heck, if he were to move at all in the next few seconds, that he wouldn't hesitate to cut him down. To which Longoris ends up expressing a large amount of hatred towards Asta, to which he ends up saying that the feeling was mutual. As right before the both of them could really get into action, this is when Julius would then arrive, as after realizing that both of them were ready, this will cause them to then immediately start the next match. As after a quick change of arenas, as well as after getting 2 new magic crystals, this is when we will then get the next match. As right after the teams would then arrive, we will see Asta and his team maneuvering to get to Longoris' team, but as they were doing so, Longoris would then arrive, sending out a bunch of spatial magic balls as he shoots them at Asta, and also the crystal. But yet, even with a generous horde of them approaching, Asta didn't hesitate, as he immediately pulls out the katana, adding lightning onto it, as this is when he then slices at the spatial balls like they were nothing, slicing them like butter, with Longoris seeing this and feeling more and more disgusted and hatred for Asta. But yet, Asta didn't really show any sign of caring about it, as this is when he would then mutter under his breath that he can actually let loose just for a little bit in this scenario, as Asta had been saving a large majority of his strength in order to use it on Yuno in the final round, but this seemed warranted to use just a little bit of it in order to make this guy pay for what he did to Finral. As Mimosa and Zora, as well as the rest of the people there watching, would look on in pure shock, as this is when suddenly Asta would then disappear from their sights, with only a few of them being able to keep track of him, as in the very next second he would then appear in front of Longoris before hitting him with a lightning slash across the chest. Now this will cause Longoris to suffer heavy damage, but Asta wasn't done. Using the opening that he had created, Asta would then begin to activate Chidori, as this is when he would then charge at Longoris, before doing something similar to what he did to Veto, as he will appear and disappear in different places around Longoris, causing him massive damage with the Chidori lightning. The only thing is, Asta made sure that it wasn't fatal enough to the point to kill him, but he most definitely made sure that it was truly going to sting for a while, and that he was going to lay bedridden for who knows how long. As Asta made sure to really pay him back for what he did to Finral, with everyone else just watching on in complete shock of just how much power Asta really was holding back throughout this entire time. As by the time that Asta was done with his onslaughts of attacks, you could see that Longoris was now on the ground bleeding quite a lot, but luckily still alive. As this is when finally Longoris' teammates would then arrive as well, along with their crystal, as they end up looking at the scene before them in complete shock, as they can't believe that the commoner was actually able to be a member of the Golden Dawn. But before they could even, comprehend about what happens next, this is when suddenly Asta would then disappear before appearing right behind them, telling them that this match was over. As this is when they would then see that their crystal was easily cut in half by Asta, as this is when Julius would then declare that Asta's team was the winner, allowing for them to now move on to the finals, as Longoris was then taken away by medical mages. Now turning to the final round, we will see Asta and Yuno as they look on in anticipation, waiting for the match to begin. As by this point now, Asta had finally gotten rid of all the negative energy from the previous match, as he had released it all on Longoris, who, as you could already tell, he was not going to get up anytime soon. Now as Asta and his team were waiting preparation, this will be during the time as Julius would then finally arrive to announce the match to begin. As without any hesitation, we will then see both Asta and Yuno then dash off to their designated location, this being the very center of the arena. Both of them would end up pulling up, with Yuno arriving in a generous burst of wind, although Asta would arrive in a burst of lightning, as both of them would then stare down at each other, with Asta saying that this has been a long time coming, with Yuno saying the same thing. As this is when suddenly Yuno would begin gathering a large amount of wind, with Asta gathering a large amount of flames, as both of them would then look at each other before finally they would then clash, as Asta releasing the katana and Yuno using his wind magic, they will then actually swing at each other, with both attacks seemingly being equal. Until, to Yuno's surprise, Asta's attacks seem to have way more power than anticipated, as he then gets sent flying, rocketing into the air, as Asta then tells Yuno that if he thinks that he can beat him with that puny attack, then he's gonna have to actually quit on that dream of becoming Wizard King. Now Yuno, hearing this, would immediately recover, as he tells Asta that that was just the beginning, as he then summons out a generous tornado, trying to crush Asta with it, with Asta seeing this immediately summoning out a generous fireball to counter. As this is where we will then see the two of them then begin to really fight for real, as they begin to exchange blows, with Yuno using his wind magic and Asta using his fire and turning it into lightning in order to zip around the entirety of the area, as everyone watching can do nothing more but look on in complete shock, as the way that they were fighting, it will look like a battle between captains. As both Asta and Yuno will be just destroying the surrounding area and giving it all they got, Mimosa as well as Zoro will be trying their best to protect the crystal, with Noel and the other guy also doing the same thing. As both teams were just simply benched for both Asta and Yuno, as we will see both of them once again clash in the center of the area, as both of them will be smiling at each other before suddenly breaking off as they try to recover their balance. Now Yuno, after seeing that Asta was all well and warmed up and seeing that he was the same thing, this is when he would then tell Asta that it was finally time for them to go all out, to which Asta would agree. As this is when Yuno would then finally activate the Spirit Dive, as he would enter inside the transformation, looking at Asta with anticipation, to which Asta ends up smirking. As after putting the katana in his sheath, this is when suddenly Asta's eyes would then shift, as he then activates the Mangekyo. As right after activating them, this is when suddenly black flames begin to erupt all around Asta, as they end up destroying a large portion of the land that they were fighting on. As everyone watching this would look on in complete shock, as they couldn't believe the power that these two wielded, but they'll be more surprised about how destructive Asta's flames were, as Yuno himself would actually begin to fly up into the air even further, as he realized that if he got even a little bit close to those flames, they could do astronomical amounts of damage. As this is when he would then smirk, telling Asta that this here was going to truly decide who was going to become the Wizard King, with Asta agreeing. As just like that, we would then see the two of them then power up, as Asta ends up letting Yuno know that this was going to be a battle of endurance. As Asta could already tell that being in that spirit dive most definitely took a lot out of Yuno, just like activating the Mangekyo really took a lot out of him. So with that said, this is where we would then see the two of them then begin, as Asta ends up immediately infusing the black flames into his katana, with Yuno summoning out a generous wind blade, as both of them would then rush at each other before colliding, causing a generous shockwave to shake up the entirety of the area. Now, to Yuno's surprise, as his wing blade would continue, trying to withstand Asta's attack, Asta's flames would actually latch onto the wind blade and actually burn it to a crisp, as Yuno has no choice but to let go of the wind blade, as it would end up burning out of existence. As that's when Yuno then realized that these flames have the ability to burn even magic itself, and that's when he realized just how dangerous it really was. But before he could really think about it though, this is when suddenly Asta then begins to maneuver, using his lightning to immediately gain an advantage on Yuno when it came to speed, as he appears behind Yuno trying to slice at him, with Yuno using the self dance to dodge out of the way. As eventually, after getting a small bit of distance away from Asta, this is when both of them would then rush each other once again, as they end up colliding. As this will go on for quite a while, as we see them just go back and forth, each one of them showing off exactly what they had in their arsenal, with Asta revealing the Dragon Flame Bomb, and Yuno releasing all types of wind magic that he learned throughout his time at the Golden Dawn. As both of them would be smiling and enjoying this, unaware to them being the fact that their literal attacks and them shaking up the entirety of the arena and just destroying it was actually cracking both of their crystals at the same time, as both Asta and Yuno were having too much fun to really care about it. As both of them would continue exchanging blows, going all out, before eventually it would then finally lead to one final conclusion. As now, turning our attention back to them, we will see both of them now standing in a crater, as by this point now they had completely decimated the land that they were fighting on. As both Asta and Yuno will look at each other, panting, as by this point now they were at their limit, with Asta's eyes hurting more than they ever did before and his vision being extremely blurry, but he still wasn't giving up, with Yuno of course also feeling extremely strained by this point, as you can see that he's gotten quite a bit of injuries, and not only that, but the spirit dive was really taxing his muscles, so that meant that all this was now going to come down to one final attack, as Yuno then tells Asta to better be ready for it, to which Asta would do so. As just like that, this is where we will then see both Asta and Yuno then charge up their ultimate attacks, as right after gathering enough power into their attacks, they will then release it, with Yuno releasing a Spirit Storm, all the while Asta would then just shoot lightning into the air. Now this would confuse Yuno as well as everyone else watching, as it seemed as if Asta had thrown the match, but right before the spirit storm hit, this would cause Asta to then smirk, as suddenly roars of thunder would then be heard, as everyone would then look into the sky as well as Yuno, as their eyes would grow wide, as a literal lightning dragon then begins to fall from the sky and rush directly towards Yuno, as Asta would then utter its name, Keating. As after saying that, this is where we will then see both attacks collide with their victims, causing a ginormous explosion that shakes up the entirety of the area that they were in and destroying both of their crystals at the same time. As everyone would look on in suspense, as people couldn't believe it. This was just supposed to be a simple match. That was all it was supposed to be. But yet these two looked like they were actually trying to kill each other. As by the time the smoke had finally cleared up and finally by the time everyone got a good look at what happened, they'll then see that both of these guys, they looked to be in near-death states, but yet somehow, some way, they were still alive. As you actually end up seeing the fact that they were still breathing and everything, but the thing was that they were heavily damaged, and not only that, but they were unconscious. As after realizing this is when Julius would then declare the match a draw before ordering a bunch of medical mages to then help them. As now with the Royal Magic Knight entrance exams coming to an end, this is where I can now do another time skip. So now flashing forward to the events that happen after the exams, we end up seeing Asta as well as the rest of the Black Bulls, as they'll be able to relax during this time with Asta actually taking this opportunity to do so. As then sooner or later, this is when Mary Leona would then enter, as she ends up informing them that all of them that were here that participated had actually passed, including Finral, but unfortunately the thing is Finral was in recovery, so that meant that he couldn't join them on the mission. But still nonetheless, his performance was impressive, so if he ever were to recover or anything like that, then he could join them. In this timeline, Magma is going to be joining the Royal Magic Knights, as I found it very disrespectful that they went ahead and didn't let him join in the main timeline. That guy was actually putting in some serious work, and he actually was thinking things through and actually giving Asta a tough challenge. Was he not doing as much as everyone else? Sure, but he was making the most of what he had. But still nonetheless, Magma ends up joining in this timeline, as the Royal Magic Knights would then be formed. As this is when they would then storm into the base of the Eye of the Midnight Sun, as we end up seeing them just wreak chaos all around. And I'm not gonna lie to you, in this timeline they actually end up doing it much easier compared to how it did in the main timeline. As thanks to the Eye of the Midnight Sun being unable to retrieve the magic stone from the Queen of Witches, and also thanks to Julius in this timeline not dying to Licht due to Yami interfering much sooner, this would actually cause them to be at a severe disadvantage. Not only that, but half their strongest members, like, you know, Rades, Voltos, and the other girl, I forgot her name, all of them were already captured by the Clover Kingdom, considering the fact that Fagolion had defeated them earlier on in the arc. So that meant that, unfortunately, the Eye of the Midnight Sun's power was really cut in half. So that meant that they really weren't able to keep up with the onslaught of Magic Knights. As we now end up turning to the final leaders of them, this being Raya, as well as, you know, Licht, as unfortunately Fauna had already been taken in by the Diamond Kingdom after Mars and her were reunited. Now, as both of them would be there trying to calculate exactly what is going on and what they should do, this is when suddenly another member would then appear, one that they actually weren't too familiar with. Now, Licht tries to give that member orders and tries to explain to him what they need to do, but to his surprise though, the member would then open his mouth to then reveal extremely dark and sharp teeth. As in the very next second, this is when right beside Licht, Raya would end up falling to the ground, as you could see that he had a ginormous hole in the side of his stomach. As this is when the person would then begin to speak, telling Licht that he was a failure and that he couldn't even accomplish a simple task. With Licht wondering what he meant, until suddenly this is when the person would then shed the skin that he was wearing, as it will be none other than the demon himself, Zegred. As originally, his plan was to use Licht as well as the plans to revive the elves as a way for him to get a new grimoire, but unfortunately due to Licht, failing miserably, that meant that he wouldn't be able to get a grimoire, but that didn't mean that he couldn't enter the physical world, since he had more than enough energy to do so after being here for so long. As he would end up revealing himself with his magical energy spreading throughout the entirety of the base, causing everyone to tense up as they wonder what exactly is this malicious energy. And Asta feeling this energy, for some weird reason, he feels a strange connection to it, as if it was familiar to him. As this is when suddenly Asta's eyes would then flash back to the Mangekyo Sharingan for a brief minute, as this is when suddenly Asta would then begin to apply lightning into his feet, as this is when he would then break off from his teammates, as he decides to go to the top floor by himself. As now turning our attention back to Licht, this is where we will then see him, as currently right now he will be getting beaten up by Zegrid, who was having no problems at all dealing with Licht, even though he didn't have a grimoire in this timeline. As he ends up telling Licht that he was pathetic, as do mind you by this point that Licht had already lost to the Wizard King, so that meant that he was already weakened, but now against Zegrid he couldn't even do anything, as Licht would be there accepting his fate by this point, as he had truly given up, as he couldn't get revenge for the elves, and now he's about to die to a creature that he's never seen before. This is when suddenly, as Zegrid would then try to stab Licht with a trident that he made, this is when Asta would then intervene, as he would block the attack using his katana, as he had arrived just at the nick of time, with Asta asking Zegrid just exactly what was he, as after making sure to push him away from Licht, this is when Zegrid would then look at Asta curiously, wondering who he was, as this is when he would then just activate a simple spell, one that would usually kill anyone else right in front of him, but when he ends up shooting the spell at Asta, Asta will be able to dodge out of the way like it was nothing, as this is when Asta would then ask once again who exactly was he, as this is when Asta would then charge up flames into his katana, just being the regular orange flames, as he ends up dashing towards him using lightning to boost his speed before slashing Zegrid, only to then be surprised as Zegrid was actually able to dodge out of the way. Now Zegrid will look at Asta actually amused by this point, as he can now finally connect the dots, as he didn't ask Asta exactly what type of demon is he connected to, with Asta after hearing these words then realizing what he meant. Now he understands why exactly the energy felt familiar to him, as Asta will look down at his grimoire to realize that he seems to have a demon sealed within it, or a demon connected to it at least, as that would explain why exactly Asta's energy is completely different compared to everyone else's, why it's so much more sinister. As Asta would be surprised by this realization that he would be so caught off guard enough to the point where Zegrid would then shoot out multiple swords towards him using his word magic, with Asta, due to being too carried away with his own thoughts, not being able to react in time. As right as the swords were about to hit Asta, this is when Yuno would then intervene, as he ends up telling Asta that he seems to be getting sloppy, as Yuno had been able to take care of all the enemies that were there and that were getting in his way, before eventually he ended up arriving here. As now with both Asta and Yuno here, this will cause Zegrid to then gain an eerie smile on his face, as Asta then tells Yuno that they can't hesitate and that they have to go all out against this man, with Yuno of course nodding his head in response, as this is when the two of them would begin to power up. Yuno immediately enters the spirit dive, with Asta immediately activating the manga kill, but when he does, he sees his eyes becoming a little bit blurry, but still nonetheless he decides to maintain it, as black flames then begin to erupt, as this is where both of them would then decide to jump Zegrid together. And yet, even though both of them were stronger than they were in the main timeline, and even though both of them were working together, Zegrid was already proving that he was a demon for a reason. And there was a reason why, even in the main timeline, even though both Asta and Yuno got some major amps, it still wasn't enough. As they continue facing off against Zegrid, trying their best and everything, Zegrid would begin to use his word magic in unique ways, causing the entirety of the Abdominite Sun's base to be destroyed due to their fight, with many of the Magic Knights, as well as many of the people held captive in there, escaping, all the while the Magic Knight captains will be looking on, wondering what exactly was going on. As now, turning our attention back to Asta and Yuno, we will see the two of them as they continue facing off against Zegrid, who is becoming increasingly annoyed with the two of them, before eventually this is when he would then use his word magic to summon out a bunch of swords, as these swords would then stab both Asta and Yuno in different areas, to which they're able to avoid the areas that were, way too fatal, but still nonetheless they were able to get hurt. Now Asta especially was having a very hard time, as it seemed as if the longer that he used the Mangekyo and the more times he used it, it caused him to become a little bit blind, as he ends up seeing that his vision was getting so blurry enough to the point where he couldn't even see Zegrid's attacks, as Asta was now relying completely on his senses and also reading the ki of his enemy, but even then that might not be enough. As Asta will continue doing this, as his vision grows blurrier and blurrier, this is when suddenly a voice would then call out to him, as the voice would tell Asta that he can't believe that he let himself get into such a state, and telling Asta that he thought that his entire power was to not give up and to push himself beyond his limits. As this is when Asta would then try looking around with his blurry vision until suddenly he would then see something very clearly. It was the only thing he could see clearly, as casually being there standing right in front of Asta was a demon that he had never seen before, as this demon would actually look very similar to Asta, including having the Sharingan eyes. As the demon would sigh, looking at the sorry state that Asta was in, as he would then tell Asta that he still has a long way to go to become the Wizard King, especially if he needs to power up at this moment right now. As Asta will look at the demon before asking it who exactly was he, with the demon saying nothing more, telling Asta that he's gonna learn that at a later time. As this is when suddenly the demon would then suddenly slap his hand directly onto Asta's face, as Asta will feel a tremendous amount of pain coming from his eyes. As turning back to the actual fight that was going on with Zegred as well as Yuno, this is when suddenly both of them would then stop as they hear Asta screaming, and turning their attention onto him, they will then see Asta as his eyes were now completely bleeding, he was actually dripping a large amount of blood from his eyes. As this is when suddenly they will then feel his magic then rise to exponential levels, completely eclipsing Zegred as well as also eclipsing Yuno's magic as well. As both of them would look on in complete shock, as Asta would continue screaming at the pain he was receiving before finally he would then open his eyes and reveal them. As now the Mangekyo eyes that Asta had finally transformed into that of the internal Mangekyo, or EMS. As Asta, after awakening these eyes and after still feeling the burn, this would cause him to grow even more angrier as he then looks directly at Zegred, who Zegred for the very first time ever since this fight had begun actually now began to feel fear, as this is when Asta would then suddenly utter the words, Amaterasu. As just like that, Zegred would get hit with the flames, with these flames being way stronger compared to how they were before. As Zegred actually begins to roll around as he tries to use his word magic to extinguish the flames, but to his surprise, it doesn't work. As Asta and Yuno would just be there watching the demon burn as he tries to extinguish the flames, but unfortunately it was just useless. As Yuno will look at Asta in complete shock, as Asta then mutters that it's still not enough. As this is when suddenly Asta would then activate the Chidori, before suddenly black flames would then envelop the Chidori as well, as the flames would be both black and purple. As Yuno seeing this will wonder what the heck was going on with Asta, before suddenly he would then see Asta disappear right in front of his eyes, as in the very next instant, Asta would then appear right in front of Zegred, telling Zegred that he was still too loud and that he needs to shut up. As this is when suddenly Asta would then stab this newly made Chidori directly into Zegred's chest, as Zegred, not being able to dodge or do anything at this moment, could do nothing more but scream out in agony, as Asta's attack was so powerful that now it completely destroyed the entire area that they were fighting in, as the Eye of the Midnight Sun base was now completely destroyed. It literally exploded after Asta's attack landed, with Yuno being sent flying and a large portion of the base just being the rubble of it just going all around the entire area, with everyone that got out of it watching, wondering what the heck was going on. As by the time the impact came to an end and by the time the dust settled, Yuno would finally see Asta, only to see him just casually looming over the demon's body, as finally the Amaterasu had finally finished it off and burned the demon's body completely, leaving nothing left behind. As Asta would look down at the ground before looking back at his hand, as Asta then turns back to Yuno. As Yuno, seeing Asta in that state, would then begin to ask him what exactly did he do, with Asta looking at Yuno before simply telling him that he doesn't know. As after saying that, this is where we will then see Asta fall into unconsciousness as we now fade to black, as this is where we're now going to do another time skip as we now move past these events. Doing a time skip to a total of now a couple of months after the events that transpire at the Eye of the Midnight Sun's base, we end up seeing a lot of things go down. Number one being the fact that the Eye of the Midnight Sun has officially come to an end. All the remaining members were taken into captivity and overall were just being questioned by the entirety of the Clover Kingdom. And not only that, but we also see that the entirety of the base was just raided for all the things that were left behind, or all the things that survived being destroyed thanks to Asta's attack. And speaking of Asta, as well as the rest of the Magic Knights, we will see that during this time, after taking care of all the work and everything, that they'll be rewarded handsomely for this. Not that they really needed it since most of them were nobles, but commoners that were there helping out in the raid were extremely thankful for it, with Asta and Yuno also getting their share, but they send most of it to Hajj Village. But also during this time, as the months will go by, we also end up seeing a couple of things play out exactly as they do in the main timeline, such as Neuro revealing herself, as well as, Julius revealing the future to Asta. With the real difference here being the fact that when he ends up revealing the future to Asta, it will be revealed that Asta's fate is kind of undecided. They don't know whether he's gonna live or die, considering the fact that Asta seems to be, he's making changes that Julius is just simply not able to calculate. And this will surprise everyone since Asta really was an oddity, considering the fact that even though he was using magic and everything, at the same time it didn't really feel like magic. But they didn't really care about this too much, as Asta just simply tells them that he's still going to continue doing whatever he wants, and that means that he's going to continue trying to become the Wizard King, which made them all happy about that, but still nonetheless they moved on. As also, during the months that went by, we would actually see that Asta finally had that conversation with Libe. As to basically sum it up, Libe begins to explain to Asta about, what happened between him and Lichita, while at the same time he also ends up telling Asta about what happened between both him as well as Asta, basically the very day that they met each other. As that day that Asta had gotten the grimoire was the very first time that Libe felt that surge of power, to which at first he thought it was magic, only to realize that it was something else. As after being stuck in the grimoire for so long, that's when Libe would then reveal to Asta that what they have been using was most definitely not magic, but a new source of power. As whatever energy that they were using seemed to be way superior to magic, considering the fact that it just seems to counter all of it. And not only that, but it was also because of the fact that it wasn't tied down to one element. As when Asta heard this, he'll be very much surprised, since the entirety of this time he's just been using like fire and also lightning. But this is when Libe then explains to Asta that a fire mage cannot just learn lightning magic like that, causing Asta to realize what it really meant about this energy source, as it meant that he not only was able to use fire and lightning, but he was able to use something else, like wind and water and even earth itself. As Asta begins to think of multiple different possibilities, this is when Libe would then finally finish up on the explanation by also talking about the Sharingan, to which Libe would say that he has the most little knowledge about it as possible, considering the fact that he only awakened it at the same time that Asta had awakened his own, saying that the very day that they connected and everything, that was the time that Libe had gotten the Sharingan, with Asta saying that was the same thing for him. Now, though Libe cannot fully explain the capabilities of the Sharingan to Asta, what he can say is the fact that he is someone who's going to continuously study it in order to find out more and more about his capabilities. And when he does, he's going to actually tell this to Asta so that way he can improve. With Asta after hearing this nodding his head before asking Libe why exactly is he helping him. With Libe then telling Asta that the reason why he's helping him and everything is because he wants Asta to help him take care of Lucifero. To which Asta, after hearing this and after thinking things over, would then agree to the terms. As just like that, both of them would end up making a contract with each other, with this contract allowing for Asta to draw even more energy from this new power source, which I'm just gonna simply tell y'all, it's literally just chakra. It's literally just chakra that was awakened after Libe had came into contact with Asta. But the thing is, Libe actually helps Asta with controlling the chakra, and with the Sharingan also helping him, this allows Asta to use ginormous spades of his chakra in sparing manners. Basically, what usually takes a large amount of chakra to make a fireball, Asta is able to use a small amount of it just to do the very same thing. So yeah, now you guys know. As now with you guys caught up on all this is where we now turn to the present, as by this point now, Julius had actually received a letter from the Heart Kingdom, asking him for an alliance and for assistance when it comes to taking down the Spade Kingdom. And when Julius heard this is when he would then assign all the Magic Knights to then train, as well as actually agreeing with the idea of a peace treaty between both the Heart Kingdom as well as the Clover Kingdom, as this would allow them an opportunity to actually gain another comrade, while also allowing them to learn new things. As we will see all the Black Bulls and all the Magic Knights training, with Asta training especially with Libe, as both of them would actually go off on their own, only being seen rarely, considering the fact that they spend all their time alone, training who knows what, as basically most of the time the Black Bulls have no idea about what's going on or really hear anything about what Asta was doing. But still nonetheless, they had faith in him, as afterwards we would then see for the next couple of months just them focusing on training before eventually it will be finally time for their attack on the Spade Kingdom. As we see the bases of the Spade Kingdom get taken care of, with thanks to them being way stronger compared to how they were in the main timeline, actually allowing them to take care of this problem way sooner. As eventually it got so bad enough to the point where the Dark Triad had to intervene, as they began going after different Magic Knight squads, taking them down, as we end up seeing Zeno go off to attack the Golden Dawn and also where Yuno was being located, and we also see Vonica go off to take care of Lola Pachica, who was getting guarded by Noelle. As everything was falling into place, as Dante would actually go off to the Black Bulls base, causing quite a bit of trouble, as even though the Black Bulls base was obviously the Black Bulls were way stronger compared to how they were in the main timeline, unfortunately they were still not strong enough to beat Dante by themselves. as Dainty would end up defeating the Black Bulls before leaving the area, hoping that would teach the entirety of the Magic Knights a lesson. However, to his surprise though, as he ends up returning back to his base, this is when he would then see that the base was eerily quiet, like there was no one there. He would try calling out to the regular servants that would of course, accompany him and everything, but unfortunately none of them were there to listen. As he begins to look around wondering where exactly were his men, this is when he then begins to walk, as eventually he would then arrive to the very throne room, the one that he used to sit in all the time. As when he ends up entering into his throne room, that's when he would then see something surprising, as he will see someone else sitting on his throne. As we would now turn our attention to this person to see that it was none other than Asta, as Asta would be there just casually sitting down on Dainty's throne while also sharpening his katana, as he was making sure that it was clean and sharp for what's about to happen. And when you end up taking a closer look at Asta, you could see that right beside him, like right next to the throne and everything, was actually a coffin. Somehow a coffin had entered into this throne room, as Asta would welcome Dainty here. Now Dainty, seeing this, then tells Asta that he doesn't know who he is, but this is when he then tells Asta that he's gonna kill him. With Asta, after hearing these words, just simply laughing, as this is when he then tells Dainty that he has no idea the situation he's gotten himself into. As this is when suddenly sparks of lightning would then actually shoot off from Asta's feet, as this is when he then smirks at Dainty. As suddenly we will then see a certain critter then appear on Asta's shoulder, as this will be Licht in his small chibi form, as he then tells Asta to quit screwing around and let's finish this guy, to which Asta would agree, as both Asta and Licht would then tell Dainty that this will be his grave and to say his final words here and now. With Dainty, after hearing this, just calmly staring at Asta, laughing at the sheer audacity that Asta was speaking of, as he couldn't believe just how arrogant Asta was being. But right as he was laughing, this is when suddenly Asta would then disappear, as in the very next second, this is when Dainty would then be slammed into a wall with a ginormous slash mark across his back, as he couldn't believe about what just happened. As Asta would be there holding his katana, staring at Dainty coldly, with Licht also doing the same thing. As these guys were now playing, as Asta had revealed the EMS or the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan right off the bat, letting Dainty know that if those were his final words, then he better not regret them later on in the afterlife. As afterwards, this is where the fight between both Dainty and Asta would then truly begin, as we see the two of them then begin to exchange blows, as they will be destroying the throne room that they were in, as they burst out of it. Now Dainty would be laughing, telling Asta that he was not expecting that, but then telling him that it was not going to be enough to beat him, as using the spatial magic, he would then try crushing Asta with a bunch of black holes, to which Asta is able to easily cut through them. And once gaining a distance, this is when suddenly Asta's eyes would then begin to spin, as Dainty, seeing this, then tells Asta that whatever party trick he was doing, it was pointless, before suddenly slamming Asta directly with a black hole that actually ends up hitting Asta directly through the heart, killing him off instantly. As Dainty will look at the scene, laughing at the fact that Asta was defeated so easily, this is when suddenly he would then be riddled by swords all around. As seeing this happen, Dainty will be shocked, wondering what exactly is going on, until he would then see Asta then appear out of nowhere, as Asta would then stab him with a katana, but then another Asta appears as it stabs him with a katana, and then more Astas appear, as this will continue on into some type of infinite loop, with Dainty wondering what the heck was going on, as this is when he then screams that he has enough, as this is when the illusion would then break, as all of this was nothing more but a genjutsu. Now Dainty would be there panting, as the pain truly felt real, and not only that, but it felt intense. But right before he could really get into calming himself down and try to remind himself that it was all fake, this is when suddenly Asta would then appear, slicing at him across the chest, causing him massive damage, as this is when suddenly Asta then spins out a bunch of flaming clones as they really get to work. We will see Dainty as he begins getting ripped to shreds by all of the Asta clones that were all around, including the actual Asta, as by the time they were done, Dainty was looking worse for wear. But immediately, without any hesitation, this is when Dainty would then bring out 100% of his demon, telling Asta that it was pointless since he could regenerate. With Asta, after hearing this, then raising an eyebrow, as after hearing that Dainty could regenerate, this would actually cause him to smile. As Asta then says, let's actually test the limits of that regeneration, with Licht fully agreeing with the idea. As in the very next few moments, the only thing that could really be explained about the whole scene was the fact that this was nothing more but brutal. As this wasn't even a fight anymore, this was an experiment, as Asta was trying to test the limits of Dante's regeneration, with Dante experiencing all types of pain that he's never felt before, as Asta had used every single offensive attack in his arsenal, including even using a couple of illusions. As by the time that Asta was done with the onslaught, we will see Dante now truly standing on his last legs, like the man looked like he was done. By this point now, his mind can't handle anymore. As Asta would be there looking at Dante, laughing at the pathetic display that Lucifero's vessel was in. This would cause Dante to then look at Asta with so much anger and rage that with that glare alone, it would kill Asta 1,000 times over. As Dante would then firmly declare to Asta that he won't cease to exist, all because some magicless brat. As this is when he would then gather up a large amount of his magic into one final attack, with Asta just calmly staring at it. In fact, he's not even gonna dodge. He was going to take it head on, as this is when Dante would then conjure up a kind of distorted space, basically. As basically what he was going to do was he was going to literally wipe out Asta. Like he's going to completely erase him with this attack. As Dante would then tell Asta that if he wants to blame anyone for what's about to happen, then he can only blame himself. As this is when Dante would then release the attack that ends up rushing at Asta. As in response, as the attack grew closer and closer, this is when Asta would then suddenly end up forming a purple construct. As right as the attack supposedly ended up hitting Asta right in the face, as Dante would laugh at the destruction it was causing, as he would wipe out a large margin of the area that they were in. This is when he would then look on to then be surprised, as something was able to block the attack. As Asta would then be revealed just casually standing there inside a Susanoo. As Asta had built the Susanoo construct, as he will look at Dante, telling him that if that was all he had, then he was pathetic. As Dante then decides to back up, as he ends up saying that was impossible, before eventually he would then see Asta then approach him, with him deciding to have no choice but to actually try running away, but unfortunately he had little to no energy to do so. As if you guys want a reference, think of it as when Sasuke was walking down Danzo, as in this timeline Asta will be walking down Dante, with Dante not being able to do anything. He'll be trying his best to run away, but unfortunately it was pointless, as Asta was just simply walking towards him, not at all stopping. As eventually, this is when Asta would then suddenly activate the Amaterasu, burning Dante's legs, causing him to collapse down to the ground as he screams out in pain, as he then turns around to look at Asta horrified. With Asta, after calmly arriving in front of Dante, then suddenly deactivating the Susanoo, as he points his katana right at Dante's face, with Dante doing nothing more but looking on completely horrified, and even beginning to release a whine telling Asta to please stop and to give him mercy, to which Asta was not gonna do. As this is when suddenly Licht would then appear on Asta's shoulder, telling Asta to literally just finish this guy off as he has no final words for him. And Asta, after making sure that Licht really had nothing else to say, this is when suddenly he would then once again activate the Amaterasu, as this time the effects would truly take place. As before, Asta had done it to just simply, kind of continue on and prolong his suffering, but now it was really just meant to just finish him off. As Dante will be burnt, as he can't do anything, the regeneration was not able to stop the flames of the Amaterasu, before eventually Dante would then finally be burnt into nothingness. As now with Dante defeated, it is when Licht would then actually begin to shed a couple of tears before looking up into the sky, as he ends up hoping that Licht would watch all of this, hoping that she rests in peace now. As now with Dante defeated, as we now turn to see that the rest of the Dark Triad was also defeated in their respective battles, this will be the end for the arc, as this is where we will now do one last final time skip. Looking into the future, after multiple years have gone by, after the events that happened with the Spade Kingdom, we will see the Clover Kingdom once again prospering, as by this point now they have entered an era of peace where they're now finally able to relax. Thanks to the new king of the Spade Kingdom, which is now revealed to be Yuno, as in this timeline, unfortunately he does not become Wizard King, as instead someone else took that position. As Yuno during this time, thanks to him being the king of the Spade Kingdom, he's actually able to once again re-establish peace and balance throughout the entirety of it, and also making sure to, keep the people safe and overall just make sure that everyone is able to live happily, while at the same time at the Heart Kingdom the same thing was happening there, with Lola Pachika also doing her best as a queen. But enough about those two, we can now finally set our eyes onto the Clover Kingdom, as by this point now the Clover Kingdom has fought many battles, it has suffered many losses, but at the end of the day remains strong and even stronger than it was before, and this would actually be especially apparent thanks to their new Wizard King, as after so many battles and after so many victories and after so many losses, we will now turn our attention to see Asta, who is now the current Wizard King of this generation. As we will see Asta now having a new look entirely, as we see him now having not only the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, but we also see him also wielding the Rinnegan, something that he had developed later on in his life. As now turning to the final scene of this What If, we will now see Asta as he'll be looking at the Clover Kingdom from the highest point that he could find, as he'll be watching everyone as they'll be enjoying themselves, as Asta would smile at achieving his dream, as we can actually see that commoners and nobles were actually getting along, and that finally they had entered an era where discrimination was not exactly too prominent, that people actually treated each other as equals. As now with his dreams realized, and after realizing that he'd done everything he could, the last scene of this What If we will see will be Asta smiling, as this will be the end to what if Asta has Sasuke's abilities. Thank you all so much for tuning into this What If. I don't really have much else to say at this very moment. I'm way too tired to really think of a way to, close this video off or really say anything else. So instead what I'm going to say is, it's your host HG Samurai, and he's signing off. So peace and have a lovely day.
Colors, this is the color, this is the color, this is the color.